Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 13 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in these mountains, but nothing like what happened in the caves beneath Dark Hollow Falls in 1974. Before I tell you this story, you need to know I'm not some crazy old man making things up. I'm a certified cave rescue instructor. I've pulled 47 people out of underground death traps. I know caves better than most people know their own backyard. But here's the thing that'll make you laugh. I'm scared of tight spaces. Real scared. Started in Vietnam when I was a tunnel rat, crawling through enemy tunnels smaller than coffins. The war ended, but the fear didn't. Strange thing for a cave specialist, right? But fear keeps you alive down there. It makes you careful. I live alone now. My wife Sarah died 3 years ago in a car accident. My daughter Emma stays with her grandmother in Luray. I see her on weekends when I can, but the job keeps me busy. Especially in late fall when the tourists think they can handle these mountains without proper gear. That's how this whole thing started. October 28th, 1974. Early snow had been falling for 2 days, and 3 college kids from Virginia Tech decided to explore the unmapped caves below Dark Hollow Falls. Smart kids, supposedly. Engineering students with proper equipment and a detailed plan. They told the ranger station they'd be back by 6 p.m. They never came back. By 8 p.m., their car was still in the parking lot, covered in snow. Their parents started calling. That's when my supervisor called me at home. "Tom, we need you and your team at Dark Hollow. 3 missing spelunkers." I grabbed my gear, Petzl headlamp, 11mm static rescue rope, first aid kit, and my old military surplus equipment I'd never quite thrown away. The drive through the snow-covered park felt rond. Somehow. Too quiet. Even with my heater running, I couldn't shake the cold that seemed to come from inside my bones. I met my partner, Jake Henderson, at the trailhead. Jake was a good man, 28 years old, married with 2 kids. He'd been my partner for 5 years, and I trusted him completely. We also had Maria Santos with us, a rookie ranger, fresh out of training, eager to prove herself on her first cave rescue. "What do we know?" I asked Jake as we checked our equipment. 3 kids, all experienced cavers. They had good gear, proper lights, emergency supplies. They were exploring the passages that branch off from the main chamber about 200 feet down. I nodded, but something felt off. The forest was too quiet. No owl calls, no rustling of small animals. Even the wind had stopped. Just the soft whisper of falling snow. "You ever been in those deep passages?" Maria asked. "Once," I said, "about 5 years ago. There's something strange about that cave system. Goes deeper than it should, according to the geological surveys. And it's..." I paused, trying to find the right words. "It's too clean. No bat droppings, no insects, no bacterial growth on the walls. Nothing lives down there." Jake laughed. "Come on, Tom. It's just mineral deposits affecting the ecosystem." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just nervous because of the claustrophobia. But as we hiked the half-mile trail to the cave entrance, I kept looking over my shoulder. The snow had stopped, but the silence felt heavy, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. The entrance to Dark Hollow Cave is a narrow opening between 2 large boulders, hidden behind the waterfall. You have to crawl through about 10 feet of tunnel before it opens up into the main chamber. My chest tightened just looking at it, but I forced myself to stay calm. Fear keeps you alive, but panic gets you killed. We clicked on our headlamps and started in. The main chamber was exactly like I remembered, about the size of a small church, with smooth limestone walls and a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our heads. Our lights created dancing shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air smelled clean, almost sterile. Too clean for a cave. "Okay," I said, my voice echoing strangely. The missing kids were exploring the passage on the far wall. That's where we start. We found their rope anchored to a strong rock formation, disappearing down into a narrow passage I'd never fully explored. The rope was good quality, properly secured. These kids knew what they were doing. "Hello!" Jake called down the passage. "Virginia Tech cavers. Can you hear us?" Nothing. Just our voices bouncing back from the depths. I checked my GPS unit, though I knew it wouldn't work well underground. The display flickered strangely, showing impossible readings, like the cave extended down over 1,000 feet. That couldn't be right. The geological surveys said this cave system was shallow, maybe 300 feet at most. "Equipment's acting weird," I muttered. We started down the rope. The passage was narrow at first, just wide enough for one person. My breathing got shallow as the walls pressed in around me, but I pushed through. After about 50 feet, it opened up again into another chamber. This is where we found the first sign that something was very wrong. The 3 missing students' gear was arranged in perfect circles on the cave floor. Backpacks, water bottles, extra batteries, emergency food, all laid out like someone had organized a garage sale, but no sign of the students themselves. "What the hell?" Maria whispered. Jake knelt down and examined one of the backpacks. No struggle, no damage. It's like they just undressed and walked away. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it wasn't claustrophobia. This was pure fear. In 13 years of rescues, I'd never seen anything like this. "Tom," Maria said, her voice shaking. "Look at the wall." I turned my headlamp toward where she was pointing. Burned into the smooth limestone were handprints, dozens of them. But these weren't normal handprints. They were too large, with fingers that seemed too long, and they were still warm. I touched one with the back of my hand and jerked away immediately. The stone was hot, like someone had just pressed their burning palm against it. "We need to go deeper," I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. They might still be alive. The next passage sloped steeply downward. Our headlamps seemed dimmer here, though I'd just changed the batteries. The beam didn't reach as far, and the darkness felt thick, almost solid. That's when Jake saw them first. "Tom," he said, grabbing my arm, "look at my shadow." I turned my light toward the wall where his shadow should be. Instead, I saw something impossible. The shadow was moving independently, waving its arms while Jake stood perfectly still. "Must be a trick of the lights," I said, but my voice cracked. Multiple light sources, creating overlapping shadows. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. We all moved our lights around, testing different angles. The shadows kept moving on their own, reaching out toward us with long, grasping fingers. Then Maria screamed. I spun around to see her being pulled backward by something I couldn't see. Her feet were sliding across the cave floor, leaving deep gouges in the stone, but there was nothing behind her. Nothing visible, anyway. "Help me!" she yelled, clawing at the ground. Jake and I grabbed her arms and pulled hard. For a moment it was like playing tug-of-war with empty air. Then suddenly the invisible force let go and we all tumbled backward. Maria was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Something grabbed me," she whispered. "Something cold. I could feel fingers, but there was nothing there." Our radios crackled with static. Then we heard something that made our blood freeze. Whispers. Dozens of voices whispering in a language none of us recognized. The sound seemed to come from the stone itself. "We're getting out of here," I said. "Right now." But when we turned back toward the entrance, the passage was different. The tunnel we'd come through was narrower, and the walls were covered with those strange handprints. More importantly, it felt wrong, like we were looking at the passage through the wrong end of a telescope. My compass needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My watch had stopped, though I could still hear it ticking. "How long have we been down here?" Jake asked. I checked my watch, 9:30 p.m., but that was impossible. We'd entered the cave at 8:45. We couldn't have been exploring for more than an hour, but somehow 5.5 hours had passed. That's when we saw the petroglyphs. Carved deep into the cave wall were symbols I recognized from my research into local Cherokee history. Warnings. Pictures of human figures being pulled into darkness by shapes with burning eyes, and words in Cherokee script that I could barely translate. Soul thieves who walk between worlds. The Cherokee had known about this place. They'd tried to warn people. As we studied the ancient carvings, our headlamps finally revealed what was really sharing the cave with us. Moving along the walls like living shadows were shapes that looked almost human, but wrong. Too tall, with arms that reached too far and eyes that burned like red coals. They were watching us. The shadow figures didn't move like normal creatures. They flowed along the walls and ceiling like liquid darkness, always staying just at the edge of our light. When I turned my headlamp directly at one, it would fade away, but I could still feel it watching from somewhere just out of sight. "Stay close," I whispered to Jake and Maria. "Keep your lights moving. Don't let them get behind us." We tried to retrace our steps, but the cave had changed. Passages that had been wide were now narrow. Tunnel L's that had sloped gently now dropped straight down into black holes that our lights couldn't penetrate. It was like the cave itself was alive, shifting and changing to trap us. "This is impossible," Maria said. "Caves don't just change." "A lot of impossible things are happening tonight," Jake replied. We'd been walking for what felt like hours when we heard the first scream. It was human, definitely human, echoing from somewhere deep below us. One of the missing students was still alive. "Down there," I said, pointing to a passage we hadn't explored. "We have to try." The passage was narrow, too narrow. My chest tightened as we squeezed through, and I could feel the weight of tons of rock above us. But someone was still alive down there. I couldn't abandon them. The passage opened into a chamber unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were covered in those handprint burns, thousands of them, and the air was warm, almost hot. In the center of the chamber, carved into the floor, was a perfect circle of Cherokee symbols. And inside that circle, we found him. One of the missing students, a young man named David according to his ID, was sitting cross-legged in the center of the symbol circle. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't blinking. He wasn't moving at all. He was just staring at something we couldn't see. "David?" I called out. "David, can you hear me?" No response. I stepped closer, and that's when I noticed his shadow. While David sat perfectly still, his shadow was dancing, writhing, reaching out toward the walls where the other shadows waited. Jake moved to the opposite side of the chamber. "Tom, look at this." He was pointing at the wall behind David. Burned into the stone in letters 3 feet tall were words in English. "They take the shadow first, then they take the soul." That's when David finally moved. His head turned toward us with a slow mechanical motion, and when he opened his mouth to speak, the voice that came out wasn't his. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, low and echoing like it was coming from a deep well. "This place is hungry. It's been hungry for so long." The shadow figures along the walls began moving faster, circling the chamber like sharks. I could see them clearly now. Tall, impossibly thin creatures with burning red eyes and fingers that ended in sharp points. They moved without making any sound, but the air grew colder wherever they passed. "David, we're here to help you," Maria said, stepping toward the circle. "Don't!" I grabbed her arm. "Don't cross that circle. I think it's the only thing protecting him." But I was wrong. As soon as I spoke, one of the shadow creatures reached down from the ceiling and grabbed Jake by the shoulders. He screamed as those burning fingers touched him, and I could smell his jacket starting to smoke. The creature lifted Jake off the ground effortlessly, carrying him toward the wall. But instead of hitting solid stone, Jake passed right through the rock face like it was made of water. His screams echoed from inside the wall itself, growing fainter and fainter until they stopped. Jake was gone. My partner of 5 years, father of 2 children, had been pulled into solid rock by something that shouldn't exist. "Oh God," Maria whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." The shadow creatures were getting bolder now. They dropped from the ceiling and rose from the floor, surrounding us. Their eyes burned brighter, and I could feel heat radiating from their bodies. The smell of sulfur filled the chamber. That's when I understood what we were dealing with. These weren't ghosts or spirits. They were something else, something from another place entirely. They existed between dimensions, able to move through solid matter like it was air, and they were hungry for something only living humans could provide. David's body suddenly went limp, collapsing to the floor. His shadow, however, remained sitting upright in the circle, the shadow version of... David turned to look at us and smiled with a mouthful of burning teeth. "Your turn," it said. The shadow creatures rushed toward us all at once. Maria fired her flare gun, and brilliant red light filled the chamber. The creatures recoiled, hissing like angry cats. Where the flare light touched them, their forms became less solid, more transparent. "Light!" I shouted. "They can't stand bright light." But we only had 3 flares between us, and dozens of the creatures. As the first flare began to fade, they pressed closer again. Maria fired her second flare, buying us a few more seconds. "We have to get out of here!" But there was nowhere to go. The passage we'd come through was now filled with shadow creatures, blocking our escape. We were trapped in the chamber with these impossible beings, and our light was running out. I fired my only flare at the thickest group of creatures, and they scattered. For just a moment, I saw another passage on the far side of the chamber, one that hadn't been there before. "There!" I pointed. "Run!" We sprinted across the chamber as the flare light dimmed. Behind us, the shadow creatures gave chase, flowing across the walls and ceiling like a black tide. I could feel their cold breath on my neck and hear the whisper of their voices promising terrible things. We dove into the new passage just as my flare died completely. In the sudden darkness, something grabbed Maria's leg. She screamed and kicked, but the creature's grip was too strong. It began pulling her back toward the chamber. I grabbed her hands and pulled as hard as I could, but it was like fighting a hydraulic winch. Whatever had her was impossibly strong. "Tom," she said, looking into my eyes, "tell them what happened here. Tell them about the shadow people." Then she let go of my hands and fired her last flare directly at the creature holding her. The brilliant light Revia led the thing in all its horrible detail. A towering figure of living darkness, with eyes like burning coals and a mouth that opened too wide, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The light heard it, made it shriek and release Maria's leg. But instead of running, she did something I'll never forget. She held that flare like a sword and walked directly toward the creature, forcing it back into the main chamber. "Go!" she yelled. "Get out while you can!" The last thing I saw was Maria Santos, rookie park ranger, standing alone against a tide of shadow creatures, holding them back with nothing but a single flare and more courage than any person should have to show. Then the passage collapsed behind me, cutting off her screams. I was alone in complete darkness, trapped in a cave that defied every law of physics I knew. My headlamp had finally died completely, and my spare batteries were somehow drained. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the distant whispers of the shadow creatures somewhere in the darkness around me. But they weren't attacking. Not yet. They were waiting for something. I felt along the passage walls, trying to find some way out. The stone was warm to the touch, almost alive. And everywhere I reached, I felt those burned handprints. Hundreds of them. Thousands. How many people had been taken by these creatures over the years? How many had ended up like David, sitting empty-eyed while their shadows danced for these monsters? That's when I remembered the Cherokee symbols on the cave wall. The warnings. The ancient people had encountered these things before and found a way to fight them. But how? I pulled out my military knife and tried to remember the symbols I'd seen. Cherokee protection marks. My hands shook as I carved the first symbol into the cave wall, working purely by touch. The stone was soft here, almost clay-like, and the carving came easy. As soon as I finished the first symbol, a faint glow appeared around the carved lines. Not much, just barely enough to see my hands, but it was something. The whispers in the darkness grew angry, more urgent. I carved another symbol, then another. Each one glowed a little brighter, pushing back the darkness inch by inch. But the shadow creatures weren't going to let me work in peace. I could feel them pressing closer, and the air was getting colder. Something touched my shoulder. I spun around, knife in hand, and saw one of the creatures standing right behind me. Up close, it was even more horrible than I'd imagined. Its face was almost human, but wrong. Like someone had stretched a person too tall and filled them with liquid darkness. Its eyes burned with a cold fire that hurt to look at directly. "You cannot protect yourself with old symbols," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "We are older than the Cherokee, older than your species. We were here when the mountains were young." "What do you want?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. "We feed on the energy of living consciousness. Your thoughts, your memories, your dreams. They sustain us. But we cannot simply take them. You must choose to give them willingly, or they provide no nourishment." I thought about David, sitting motionless in that circle while his shadow danced. You trap people, make them give up. We offer them escape from fear, from pain, from all the burdens of living. In return, they give us their essence. It is a fair trade. What about the 3 students? The creature's smile was terrible. They chose to stay, as your companions chose to stay, as you will choose. I could feel it then, a terrible temptation to just stop fighting, to sit down in the darkness and let these things take away all the pain and fear and loneliness I'd been carrying since Sarah died. No more claustrophobia, no more nightmares about Vietnam, no more empty house and weekend visits with Emma that always ended too soon. The knife felt heavy in my hand. The Cherokee symbols I'd carved were glowing brighter, but they seemed so small against all this darkness. "I know what you're thinking," the creature whispered. "You blame yourself for your wife's death. If you had driven that night instead of letting her go alone, if you had left work earlier, if you had been a better husband." It was reading my thoughts, finding every guilty secret and regret I'd buried. And the worst part was, it was right. I did blame myself. I had been working late that night, choosing overtime pay over dinner with my wife. She'd driven herself to her sister's house in the rain, and a drunk driver had run a red light. "Give us your pain," the creature said. "Give us your guilt. We will take it all away." For a moment I almost did it. The offer was so tempting. But then I thought about Emma, my daughter. She'd already lost her mother. If I disappeared in these caves, she'd lose her father too. She'd grow up an orphan, always wondering what happened to me. I couldn't do that to her. I turned back to the wall and kept carving symbols even as more shadow creatures gathered around me. They pressed closer, their cold presence making my breath come out in visible clouds, but they couldn't cross the faint barrier of light created by the Cherokee marks. "You will tire eventually," one of them said. "You will make a mistake, and then we will have you." Maybe they were right, but I kept carving, working my way around the passage, creating a circle of protection symbols. With each mark, the light grew stronger, and the creatures had to step further back. That's when I realized something important. They weren't just afraid of light. They were afraid of intention. The Cherokee symbols weren't magic by themselves. They were a way of focusing human will, human determination to survive and protect others. I thought about Emma as I carved, about getting back to her, about being the father she needed, about Jake's kids, who deserved to know what really happened to their dad, about Maria, who died to give me a chance to escape. The light from the symbols blazed brighter, and the shadow creatures recoiled with hissing sounds like steam escaping from a kettle. "You cannot hold this forever," they said. But their voices sounded less certain now. I completed the circle of symbols and stood in the center, surrounded by protective light. For the first time since entering the cave, I felt safe. But I also felt something else, a rumbling in the stone around me, like the mountain itself was waking up. The cave was collapsing. Whether it was because I'd disrupted whatever force kept this place stable, or because the shadow creatures were losing their grip on reality, I didn't know. But the ceiling was starting to crack, and dust was falling like snow. I had to get out, now. I ran through the collapsing cave, my knife still glowing with the power of the Cherokee symbols I'd carved. The light wasn't much, but it was enough to show me the way as passages reformed around me, leading me back toward the surface. Behind me, I could hear the shadow creatures screaming, a sound like 1,000 voices crying out in frustration and rage. They couldn't follow me while I carried the light, but I could feel their hatred pressing against my back like a physical weight. The cave shuddered and groaned around me. Sections of ceiling crashed down, blocking passages I'd just run through. It was like the whole mountain was trying to seal itself, to trap the shadow creatures in the depths where they belonged. I climbed up the rope we'd used to descend, my muscles burning with exhaustion. My knife was getting dimmer as I got further from the deep chambers, but it still provided enough light to see. The main chamber was partially collapsed when I reached it, but I could see stars through a gap in the ceiling where rocks had fallen. I squeezed through the gap and found myself outside, gasping in the cold October air. Snow was falling again, covering the entrance to Dark Hollow Cave. But as I watched, that entrance was changing. Boulders shifted and settled, sealing the opening. Within minutes, there was no sign that a cave had ever existed. There. I stumbled through the snow back to where we'd parked. Jake's truck was still there, covered in white. My own vehicle started on the first try, as if everything above ground was still normal. By the time I reached the ranger station, it was dawn. I'd been in the caves for 10 hours, but it felt like days. My supervisor was waiting for me, along with 2 men in dark suits who said they were from the Department of the Interior. "Where's your team, Whitmore?" my supervisor asked. I told them everything. The shadow creatures, the impossible cave changes, Jake being pulled through solid rock, Maria's sacrifice. I showed them the Cherokee symbols I'd carved on my knife, still faintly glowing. They listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, one of the men in suits spoke up. "Ranger Whitmore, you've been through a traumatic experience. Cave-ins, toxic gases, oxygen deprivation, they can cause hallucinations, false memories. We think you and your team got separated in a collapse and you've constructed an elaborate fantasy to deal with the trauma. What about Jake and Maria? Where are their bodies?" "The cave system is completely sealed. It would take months to excavate safely. We'll have to list them as missing, presumed dead." They took my knife, my equipment, my report. Everything that proved what had really happened. Within a week, the area around Dark Hollow Falls was declared geologically unstable and permanently closed to the public. Warning signs went up, and a fence was built to keep people away. I tried to fight it. I went to newspapers, to other park rangers, to anyone who would listen. But who believes a story about shadow creatures that live between dimensions, especially when the government has already provided a reasonable explanation involving cave-ins and oxygen deprivation? I was transferred to a different section of the park and ordered to undergo psychological evaluation. The counselor said I was suffering from survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder. They weren't wrong about the PTSD, but it wasn't from imagining things. It was from seeing things that shouldn't exist. I developed severe photophobia after that night. Bright lights hurt my eyes, but darkness was worse. I couldn't sleep without at least 3 lamps burning in my bedroom. I couldn't work underground anymore. The claustrophobia had gotten worse, mixed with memories of shadow creatures waiting in the dark. But I also started researching. I learned Cherokee symbols and protection rituals. I studied folklore from around the world, looking for similar stories. And I found them. Native American tribes across the continent have legends about shadow people who steal souls. European folklore speaks of creatures that live in the spaces between worlds. Ancient cave paintings show figures being pulled into darkness by beings with burning eyes. The shadow people aren't unique to Shenandoah. They're everywhere humans have gone deep enough underground. Every major cave system has stories, people who vanish without a trace, strange sounds and lights, equipment that fails for no reason. Other rangers have started coming to me quietly, sharing their own experiences. A rescue team in Mammoth Cave found climbers' gear arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Cavers in Carlsbad reported shadows that moved independently of their light sources. Always the same pattern, always dismissed as hallucinations or hoaxes. I retired early in 1976, 2 years after the Dark Hollow incident. I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't pretend that our caves were safe when I knew what was really living down there. But I kept Emma close, made sure she understood that some places are too dangerous to explore, no matter how curious you get. She's grown up, no. W has kids of her own. Sometimes she asks about that night, about what really happened to make me change so completely. I've never told her the whole truth. How do you explain to your daughter that there are creatures living beneath our world who feed on human consciousness? How do you tell her that the mountain she grew up playing on is home to something that shouldn't exist? But I've made sure she knows the Cherokee protection symbols. I've taught her grandchildren the same marks, told them it's just an old family tradition. They carve them into walking sticks and camping gear, thinking it's just something Grandpa Tom likes to do. Maybe they'll never need that protection. Maybe the shadow people are content to stay in the deep places, only taking the occasional spelunker who ventures too far into their domain. But I've seen what happens when someone goes down there unprepared. I still carry my old military knife, and I've carved those Cherokee symbols deep into the blade. They don't glow anymore. I'm too far from that place of power now, but I can feel them humming with protective energy when I hold the knife in the dark. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can hear whispers coming from the direction of Dark Hollow Falls. The shadow people are still down there, waiting in the spaces between worlds. They're patient, they're hungry, and they remember the man who escaped their realm carrying stolen light. If you're thinking about exploring caves, any caves, remember this story. Carry multiple light sources, learn some Cherokee protection symbols, and carve them into your equipment. Travel in groups, and never go deeper than you can safely return. And if you ever find yourself in a cave where the shadows move on their own, where your equipment fails for no reason, where the passages seem to change when you're not looking, get out. Get out immediately, and don't look back. Because some hungers are older than human civilization, and some darkness should never be disturbed. The shadow people are real. They're waiting. And next time, they might not let anyone escape to tell the story. My name is Patricia Stormcrow, and I've been flying helicopters for the National Park Service for 8 years now. Most people think being a park ranger is all about campfires and bear warnings. But here at New River Gorge in West Virginia, my job is different. I fly rescue missions over one of the most dangerous bridges in America. The New River Gorge Bridge sits 876 feet above the river. When people fall from there, or when cars crash on the mountain roads below, I'm the one who gets the call. I've pulled 47 people out of situations they never thought they'd survive. I've also pulled out 23 who didn't make it. You remember every face. Before this job, I worked as an air traffic controller. I got used to watching things in the sky, tracking them, making sure they went where they were supposed to go. Now I spend my days in a Bell 206 helicopter, looking down instead of up. But the skills are the same. You notice when something doesn't belong. My helicopter has all the latest gear. Thermal cameras that can spot body heat from a mile away. GPS that works even in the worst storms. Radio equipment that keeps me connected to base no matter how deep in the gorge I fly. I trust my equipment like I trust my own hands. The thing is, I've always been a skeptic. When people in Point Pleasant talk about the Mothman, that giant bird thing with red eyes that supposedly shows up before disasters, I just nod and smile. Folklore is folklore. I deal with facts. I deal with what I can see and measure and prove. But that was before February 15th, 1993. The weather that morning was ugly. Gray clouds hung low over the bridge, and the wind was gusting to 40 knots. Not great flying weather, but not impossible either. I'd been called out because bridge workers reported strange vibrations in the main support cables. After what happened to the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant back in 196, 46 people dead when it collapsed. We don't take bridge problems lightly. I did my pre-flight check like always. Oil levels good, fuel tank full, all instruments reading normal. The only thing that felt off was the silence. Usually the birds around the gorge are noisy, especially the crows. They like to follow my helicopter, probably hoping I'll drop something edible. But that morning, not a single bird was in the sky. Weather's got them spooked, I told myself, and lifted off. The bridge came into view 5 minutes later. From the air, it's beautiful. A single steel arch spanning the gorge like a rainbow made of metal. But as I got closer, something made my stomach tighten. The bridge looked wrong somehow. Not broken, just wrong. I circled lower, using the thermal camera to scan the structure. That's when I saw the first impossible thing. Several of the main support cables were twisted, not bent or broken, twisted, like someone had grabbed steel cables as thick as a person's waist and wrung them out like wet towels. No wind could do that. No weather could do that. The forces required would be enormous. I radioed back to base. "Control, this is Ranger 1. I'm seeing some unusual damage to the bridge structure. The main cables show signs of twisting stress. Recommend immediate engineering inspection." "Copy that, Ranger 1. Can you determine the cause?" I stared at the twisted metal through my binoculars. "Negative, Control. This doesn't match any damage pattern I've seen before." That's when my radio filled with static. Not the normal kind you get from weather interference. This was different. A rhythmic pulsing that almost sounded like breathing. My compass needle started spinning slowly, like it couldn't find magnetic north. I've flown in storms, through mountain passes, over forest fires. I know equipment failure when I see it. But this wasn't failure. This was like something was actively messing with my instruments. "Control, I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. My navigation equipment is acting up." The static got worse. Through it, I thought I heard something else, a sound like massive wings beating, but that was impossible. There was nothing on my thermal camera, nothing visible through the windscreen. I decided to head back to base. As I banked away from the bridge, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Something large and dark on the bridge's north tower. But when I turned to look directly at it, nothing was there. Just an empty steel tower reaching up into the gray sky. But as I flew home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. Something that didn't want to be seen. 3 days later, I was back at the bridge with a full engineering team. State highway inspectors, structural engineers, even a guy from the company that built the bridge back in 1977. They spent 6 hours examining every inch of those twisted cables. "Never seen anything like it," the head engineer told me as we wrapped up. "The metal shows signs of tremendous torque stress, but there's no evidence of equipment contact. No tool marks, no heat damage from cutting torches. It's like something just grabbed them and twisted." "What kind of force would that take?" I asked. He did some quick math on his clipboard. "Conservative estimate? About 50,000 pounds of torque pressure. You'd need industrial equipment, heavy machinery." I looked around the bridge deck. "Any evidence heavy machinery was up here?" "That's the thing. No crane marks on the pavement, no tire tracks, no nothing. If someone did this with equipment, they did it and cleaned up so well it's like they were never here." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those cables, about the static in my radio, about that glimpse of movement on the tower. So I decided to do something stupid. I decided to fly back to the bridge after dark. I told myself it was just to get another look without all the POSs. Pull around. Maybe I'd missed something in the daylight. Maybe the thermal camera would pick up residual heat signatures or something useful. I lifted off at 11 p.m. The night was clear, stars bright overhead, no wind to speak of, perfect flying conditions. The bridge was completely dark except for the aircraft warning lights on the towers. I flipped on my spotlight and started another slow circle, scanning the structure. That's when I saw him. A man was standing on the bridge deck, right in the middle of the span, where the twisted cables were. I immediately radioed the state police. Jumpers sometimes come to the bridge at night, and we have protocols for talking them down. But as I got closer, my spotlight illuminating the figure, I realized this wasn't a potential suicide. The man was over 7 feet tall. That was my first clear thought. He was too tall to be normal, and he wasn't wearing any clothes, but he didn't look naked either. His skin was dark, almost black, and it seemed to absorb my spotlight instead of reflecting it. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were red, not bloodshot red, not the red of reflected light. They glowed red, like hot coals in the darkness, and they were huge. Each eye was easily the size of a dinner plate. I've been in search and rescue for 8 years. I've seen people in shock, people in hypothermia, people having psychotic breaks. I thought I was looking at someone with a medical emergency. Control, this is Ranger 1. I have a person on the bridge, possibly in medical distress. Subject appears disoriented and may need immediate medical attention. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. The figure wasn't moving like a person in distress. He was standing perfectly still, those red eyes fixed on my helicopter. And he was too big. Even from 200 feet away, I could tell he was unnaturally large. Then he spread his arms, and weren't arms. They were wings, massive wings that unfolded from his shoulders like the wings of a moth, dark, veined, spanning at least 15 feet from tip to tip. The wind from them reached my helicopter, making it rock in the air. I stared for maybe 10 seconds, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a person. This wasn't anything that should exist. The creature looked directly at me, tilted its head like it was curious, and then launched itself into the air. It flew straight at my helicopter. I yanked the cyclic stick hard to the right, pushing the engine to full power. The Bell 206 can do about 140 miles per hour in level flight. I was doing every bit of that, racing away from the bridge as fast as the helicopter could manage. But when I looked in my mirrors, the creature was keeping pace, not struggling to keep up, not falling behind. It was flying alongside me like it was out for a casual evening flight. Those huge wings barely seemed to be working, just gentle, rhythmic beats that somehow propelled it at speeds no bird or bat could match. Then it did something that made me forget how to breathe. It flew in front of my helicopter and hovered there, facing me through the windscreen. Up close, I could see its face. It was human-like, but wrong. The features were too sharp, too angular. The mouth was too wide. And those eyes, those red, glowing eyes, they looked intelligent. They looked like they were trying to tell me something. The creature raised one clawed hand and pointed. Not at me. Past me. Back toward the bridge. Then it spoke. Not with its mouth. The voice came from inside my head, clear as my own thoughts. Warning. Danger. Many will fall. I blinked, and it was gone. Just vanished into the darkness like it had never been there at all. I flew back to base in complete silence, my hands shaking on the controls. I filed a report about a large bird strike near the bridge, and said nothing about the rest of it. Who would believe me? Hell, I didn't believe me. But two things kept me awake that night. First, the creature, his words echoing in my mind. Warning. Danger. Many will fall. And second, the memory of those red eyes. They hadn't looked angry or threatening. They'd looked worried. I didn't tell anyone what I'd really seen that night. How could I? Hey, boss, I met a 7-foot-tall Mothman who spoke to me telepathically. Isn't the kind of thing that keeps you employed with the Park Service. But I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Warning. Danger. Many will fall. So I started doing research. Real research. I spent my off-duty hours in the library reading everything I could find about the Point Pleasant Mothman sightings from 1966 and 1967. Most of it was folklore and sensationalized newspaper stories. But buried in the archives, I found some interesting patterns. Every credible Mothman sighting in Point Pleasant had happened near the Silver Bridge, always within a month before its collapse. And the witnesses, the reliable ones, not the attention seekers, all described the same thing. A creature that seemed to be warning people about disaster. John Klein, a reporter who'd covered the story, wrote in his notes, "The entity appeared distressed when discussing the bridge. Multiple witnesses reported feeling overwhelming sadness or fear when the creature made contact." I also found something else. Bridge collapses throughout Appalachian history showed a strange pattern. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington, the Point Pleasant Silver Bridge, the Mianus River Bridge in Connecticut. In almost every case, there were reports of unusual animal behavior, or large bird sightings in the weeks leading up to the structural failure. What if it wasn't coincidence? What if something was trying to warn people? That's when I made my second stupid decision. I started flying regular night patrols over the New River Gorge Bridge. Unofficial patrols. Just me checking to see if the CR would appear again. On the fourth night, it did. I was doing a slow circle around the bridge's south tower when my instruments went crazy. The radio filled with static, the compass spun, and the engine started running rough. Not failing, just struggling, like something was interfering with the electrical system. That's when I saw him on the tower. Same red eyes, same impossible size. But this time, he wasn't alone. 3 bridge workers were doing emergency repairs on the tower, working the night shift to fix some of the twisted cables. They had floodlights set up, making them clearly visible from the air. The creature was perched about 50 feet above them, watching their work. And something was wrong. It was agitated, moving restlessly, those massive wings fluttering with obvious distress. I flew closer, and suddenly the creature's voice filled my mind again. Danger below. Metal sickness. They cannot see. I looked at the bridge workers through my binoculars. They seemed fine, going about their business, cutting away the damaged cables and installing new ones. What danger? I whispered, feeling foolish for talking to empty air. The creature leaped from the tower and flew directly toward my helicopter. This time, I didn't run. I held position as it approached the windscreen. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. Its skin wasn't really skin. It was more like fur, fine and dark. The wings had intricate patterns on them, like a moth's wings, but larger and more complex. And those eyes weren't just glowing. They were moving, the light shifting and swirling like it was looking into different dimensions. Show me, I said aloud. The creature pressed one clawed hand against the windscreen. The moment it made contact, my vision exploded with images. I saw the bridge as it was now. Then I saw it changing. The metal aging rapidly, stress fractures spreading through the support cables like cracks in ice. I saw the twisted cables they'd found, not damaged by some outside force, but warning signs. The metal itself was failing from the inside. Out. The vision shifted. I saw the bridge during rush hour traffic. Cars packed bumper to bumper. Tourists stopping to take photos. And then I saw the south tower buckle, the roadway tilting, vehicles sliding helplessly toward the water 876 feet below. I saw bodies. Dozens of them. People I might recognize if I met them on the street. The vision ended as suddenly as it started. The creature was gone, and I was alone in the cockpit with the taste of metal in my mouth and tears on my face. But now I knew. The bridge was going to collapse, soon, and it would happen during peak traffic, when the maximum number of people would die. I radioed base immediately. Control, this is Ranger 1. I need to speak with the bridge engineering team immediately. Emergency priority. Ranger 1, it's 2 a.m. Can this wait until morning? Negative. People are going to die if we don't act now. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I tried to explain what I'd discovered without mentioning the creature. I talked about stress patterns I'd noticed, metal fatigue indicators, subtle signs of structural failure that might not show up in normal inspections. The engineering team was polite but skeptical. They'd already examined the bridge thoroughly. The twisted cables were anomalous, sure, but the overall structure was sound. They had computer models that proved it. Ms. Stormcrow, the head engineer said patiently, bridges don't just collapse. There are warning signs, systems in place to detect problems. The New River Gorge Bridge was built to last for 100 years. So was the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, I said, right up until it killed 46 people. That got their attention. They agreed to do another inspection, a more thorough one, using ultrasound to check for internal stress fractures that might not be visible on the surface. But bureaucracy moves slow. The inspection was as scheduled for the following week. I knew we didn't have that long. That night, I flew back to the bridge one more time. The creature was waiting for me, perched on the north tower like it knew I'd come. How long? I asked aloud. The answer came immediately, filling my mind with cold certainty. 3 days, when the sun is highest and the bridge carries the most weight. 3 days until the collapse. 3 days to convince people who trusted computers and engineering reports more than the word of a helicopter pilot who'd been spending too many nights alone in the sky. As I flew home, I made a decision. If the officials wouldn't listen to warnings, maybe they'd listen to evidence. I was going to document everything. Every sign of structural failure, every stress indicator, every piece of proof I could gather. And when the time came, I was going to be in the air above that bridge, ready to save every life I could. What I didn't know was that the creature, the Mothman, was making its own preparations, and that when the time came, we'd both be risking everything to prevent a disaster that might already be inevitable. The ultrasound inspection found internal stress fractures throughout the bridge's support system, hairline cracks in the metal that hadn't shown up on visual inspections. The engineering team suddenly got very serious very quickly. But fixing the bridge would take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, it had to stay open. The New River Gorge Bridge is the only major river crossing for 40 miles in either direction. Closing it would cut off entire communities. So they did what bureaucrats always do. They formed a committee to study the problem. The bridge stayed open. Tourist season was coming. The state needed the revenue. I knew we were down to 2 days when the creature appeared in my helicopter. I was flying a routine patrol on the morning of February 18th when the cabin suddenly filled with a smell like ozone and wet earth. My instruments went dead. Not malfunctioning, completely dead. And when I looked to my right, he was sitting in the passenger seat, 7 feet tall, folded into a space meant for an average human. Those red eyes fixed on mine, wings tucked against his back like a dark cloak. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt oddly calm, like I'd been waiting for this moment. "You're not just warning me about the bridge, are you?" I said aloud. "You're asking for help." The voice in my mind was tired, sad. "I cannot save them alone. You have the machine that flies. You have the knowledge of rescue." "What are you?" Images flooded my consciousness. Not visions of the future this time, but memories. Ancient ones. I saw the same creature, or others like him, appearing throughout history, always near disasters, always trying to warn people who couldn't or wouldn't listen. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the 1912 sinking of the Titanic, the 1944 Hartford circus fire, and always the same pattern. The creature would appear, try to warn people, and watch helplessly as disaster struck. We are guardians, I suppose you would say, watchers. We exist between what is and what might be. We see the fractures in time where tragedy grows. Why can't you stop it directly? The sadness in its mental voice was overwhelming. We can only observe and warn. The choice to listen belongs to your kind. But this time I thought perhaps what? Perhaps one of you would work with me instead of running away. I understood then. Every Mothman sighting in history had been a desperate attempt to save lives, and every time people had either dismissed the warnings as folklore or been too afraid of the messenger to listen to the message. When will it happen? Tomorrow, when the sun reaches its highest point and the bridge carries its heaviest load. The metal will surrender to stresses it can no longer bear. How many people? The creature's eyes dimmed. Too many. The bridge will be full. Tourists coming to see the autumn colors, families with children, people who have lived full lives and people who have barely begun theirs. I looked at my watch. 1 p.m. on February 18th. We had exactly 24 hours. What's the plan? The creature's eyes brightened. For the first time, I sensed something like hope in its mental voice. You know the bridge. You know where people go to escape when disaster strikes. You have the machine that can reach them quickly. And you? I will do what I can to delay the collapse, to give you time. I didn't ask how. Some questions are better left unasked. We spent the rest of that day planning. I filed a flight plan for routine tourist safety patrol on February 19th. I loaded my helicopter with every piece of rescue equipment it could carry. Medical supplies, emergency blankets, ropes, even a portable defibrillator. Most importantly, I called in sick for my partner, Jake Martinez. He had a wife and 2 little kids. Whatever was going to happen, I wasn't going to risk his life too. At 11 a.m. on February 19th, I lifted off for the New River Gorge Bridge. It was a beautiful day. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-60s, perfect visibility. The kind of day that draws tourists out in droves. The bridge was packed. I counted at least 60 cars crossing in both directions. People had pulled over at the scenic overlooks to take pictures. Families were walking across on the pedestrian walkway, pointing down at the river far below. I circled high above, staying out of the way, but ready to move fast when the time came. At exactly 12:47 p.m., my radio filled with static. Through the interference, I heard a familiar voice. "It begins. The South Tower first." I looked down and saw him. The Mothman was perched on the South Tower's peak, his wings spread wide. Even from 500 feet up, I could see the red glow of his eyes. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. The tower was moving, just slightly, swaying in a way that towers aren't supposed to sway. The first cable snapped at 12:51. It made a sound like a goo and shot, echoing across the gorge. People on the bridge stopped walking, looked around confused. Cars slowed down as drivers tried to figure out what they'd heard. The second cable snapped at 12:53. This time, everyone felt it. The bridge deck shifted maybe 6 inches to the south. Not much, but enough to make it clear that something was seriously wrong. That's when the panic started. People began running. Cars accelerated, trying to get off the bridge before whatever was happening got worse. But there were too many of them, and the bridge was too long. Traffic jammed up at both ends as everyone tried to escape at once. The third cable snapped at 12:55. The South Tower tilted. Not much, maybe 5 degrees. But when you're 876 feet in the air, 5 degrees feels like the end of the world. I dove toward the bridge, pushing my helicopter to its limits. Through my headphones, I could hear the Mothman's voice. "The tower holds for now. I have perhaps 5 minutes before the metal surrenders completely." "How are you holding it?" "By will alone, but will is not infinite." I reached the bridge just as the fourth cable snapped. The roadway tilted sharply, and 3 cars slid toward the gap where the safety barrier had been. I watched a blue sedan with a family inside go over the edge, falling toward the water. I dove after them. The Bell 206 isn't designed for vertical rescues, but adrenaline makes you creative. I managed to get underneath the falling car and deploy my rescue winch. The hook caught the car's rear bumper just 200 feet above the water. The winch groaned under the weight, but it held. I pulled them back up to the bridge level where other people helped drag the family to safety. But even as I saved those 4 lives, I could see more cars sliding toward the edge. "I cannot hold much longer." The Mothman's voice was strained with effort. The metal cries out in pain. I looked up at the South Tower. The creature was no longer perched on top. He was wrapped around the tower's base, his wings spread wide, his clawed hands gripping the steel beams. Somehow, through sheer force of will or whatever power he possessed, he was holding the tower upright. But I could see it was killing him. His red eyes were dimming, and dark cracks were spreading across his skin like stress fractures in metal. "Hold on," I radioed back. "Just a little longer." I worked faster than I've ever worked in my life. The helicopter became a lifeline, ferrying people from the collapsing bridge to safety on solid ground. I pulled a school bus full of kids off the tilting roadway. I rescued 2 elderly couples who couldn't run fast enough. I grabbed a woman who was dangling from a broken guardrail by her fingertips. Each rescue took precious time, and with each passing minute, I could feel the Mothman's strength fading. At 1:15 p.m., his mental voice was barely a whisper. "I cannot, much longer." I looked down and saw there were still at least 20 people trapped on the bridge. Too many for me to save before the creature's strength gave out entirely. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. "Let it go," I told him. "Let the bridge fall." "But the people, trust me." I positioned my helicopter directly under the bridge's center span. When the south tower finally collapsed, the roadway would tilt like a ramp. If I timed it right, if I was in exactly the right position, I could catch the remaining people as they slid off the edge. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the only chance those people had. "Let go," I said again. "Now!" The Mothman released his grip on the tower. The south side of the new River Gorge Bridge collapsed in a cascade of twisted metal and concrete. The roadway tilted at a 45-degree angle, and everything on it began sliding toward the river. Cars, trucks, people, all tumbling through the air toward the water, 876 feet below. I caught as many as I could. The official report said that equipment failure caused the new River Gorge Bridge collapse at 1:17 p.m. on February 19, 1993. Metal fatigue, inadequate inspection protocols, design flaws that had gone unnoticed for 16 years. 23 people died. 47 lived. The local newspapers called me a hero. The governor gave me a medal. The Park Service promoted me to Chief of Aviation Safety for the entire southeastern region. But I know the truth. I didn't save those people. The Mothman did. I never saw him again after the bridge fell. When the tower collapsed and he finally let go, something went out of those red eyes. Not death exactly, but departure. Like whatever force had kept him here, whatever purpose had driven him to try to save lives, had been fulfilled. The last thing I felt from him wasn't words. It was gratitude. They transferred me to a desk job 6 months later. Stress-related performance issues, according to my file. Apparently, surviving a major disaster and saving 47 lives makes you emotionally unstable in the eyes of federal bureaucracy. I didn't fight it. I'd seen enough. But I kept monitoring bridge safety reports from across the Appalachian region, looking for patterns, watching for signs. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing structural engineering reports and safety inspection data, I'll come across something interesting. A bridge in Virginia where workers reported seeing large birds near damaged support cables. A span in Kentucky where multiple witnesses described red lights moving around the towers just before a safety inspection revealed critical stress fractures. Each time I pick up the phone and make some calls. Anonymous tips to the right engineering firms. Suggestions that maybe they should take another look at that particular bridge, just to be safe. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. But I've learned something important in the 8 years since the new River Gorge Bridge collapsed. Monsters aren't always the creatures we're afraid of. Sometimes they're the ones trying to protect us from the things we should really fear. Structural engineering failure, human negligence, the bureaucratic indifference that values convenience over safety. Those are the real monsters. The Mothman was just trying to save us from ourselves. I'm 60 years old now. Retired from the Park Service, living in a small house outside Beckley, West Virginia. I still keep my pilot's license current, just in case. And sometimes, on clear nights when the stars are bright over the mountains, I take my little Cessna up for a flight around the gorge. The new bridge they built is beautiful. Modern engineering, computer-designed safety systems, built to last for 200 years instead of 100. But I still scan the towers when I fly past, looking for red lights. Listening for that familiar voice in my mind, because somewhere out there, I believe he's still watching, still trying to warn people about disasters they can't see coming, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone will listen before it's too late. And if he ever needs help again, if another bridge starts showing stress fractures or another disaster needs preventing, I'll be ready. Some people are afraid of things that go bump in the night. Me? I'm afraid of the silence when they stop trying to warn us. The Mothman wasn't the monster in this story. We were. My name is William Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I used to study to be a priest, but I lost my faith somewhere along the way. Now I work in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, taking care of the trees and making sure they stay healthy. I have a doctorate in forestry. That means I know a lot about trees and plants. I've written papers about the forests here in the mountains. People call me when something strange happens to the trees, because I usually know what's wrong. But what happened in Raven Rock Hollow was different. It changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It started in October 1978. The leaves were turning colors, red and gold and orange. I got a call from my supervisor about some trees dying in an old part of the forest. Not just one or two trees, a whole grove of ancient oaks and maples, some over 100 years old. "They just died overnight, Will," my supervisor said on the radio. "Never seen anything like it. Need you to take a look and tell us what killed them." I packed my equipment, soil testing kit, sample containers, my camera, and notebooks. The drive to Raven Rock Hollow took 2 hours on winding mountain roads. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter it got. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even my radio started crackling with static. When I reached the hollow, my truck's engine sputtered and died. I tried starting it again, but nothing happened. The battery was fine that morning. I walked the last half mile. The smell hit me first, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. Then I saw the trees. They stood in a perfect circle, maybe 50 feet across. Every single tree was dead. Not dying. Completely dead. Their leaves had fallen off and turned black. The bark was peeling away in long strips. But here's what made my hands shake as I wrote in my notebook, the dish. Dead trees formed a perfect spiral pattern starting from the center and curling outward. Nature doesn't work that way. Diseases spread randomly. Insects attack the weakest trees first. Drought affects trees based on their root depth and water access. But this looked like someone had drawn a line on the ground and said, everything inside this line dies. I took soil samples from inside and outside the dead zone. The dirt inside felt cold, even though the sun was shining. When I touched it with my bare hands, my fingers went numb. The pH meter gave readings that made no sense. The soil was so acidic it should have been eating through my equipment. Nothing should grow in dirt like that. But just 10 feet away, outside the spiral, the soil tested perfectly normal. I set up my camera and started taking pictures. Through the viewfinder, I noticed something else. The dead trees weren't random types. They were all the old ones. The oaks that had been growing here since before the Civil War. The maples that Native Americans might have tapped for syrup centuries ago. Someone had killed the ancient trees and left the young ones alone. As the sun got lower, shadows stretched between the dead trunks. That's when I heard it. A sound like wind through leaves, but there were no leaves left. The sound was coming from the center of the spiral. I should have left then. Any smart person would have packed up their equipment and hiked back to get help. But I'm a scientist. I needed to understand what was happening. I walked toward the center of the dead trees, stepping over roots that crumbled under my boots. The sweet, rotten smell got stronger. My camera battery died, even though it was full when I started. In the very center of the spiral stood one tree that wasn't quite dead. An old oak, maybe 200 years old. Its trunk was wider than I could reach around. Most of its leaves had fallen, but a few still clung to the branches. They were moving in a wind I couldn't feel. Carved into the bark, about eye level, were symbols I didn't recognize. Not initials like kids. Carve. These were older, deeper. They looked like they'd been cut into the tree a long time ago and had grown with the bark. I reached out to touch them, and the tree's remaining leaves rustled louder, like a warning. That's when I saw her, just for a second standing behind the oak tree. A woman in a long, dark dress. Her hair hung down over her face, but I could see she was pale. Not just pale, but white as bone. She was there, and then she wasn't. My rational mind said it was a trick of the shadows, the setting sun playing games with my eyes. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. I grabbed my equipment and walked quickly back to my truck, trying not to look over my shoulder. My hands shook as I tried the ignition. On the third try, the engine turned over. As I drove away, I looked in my rear-view mirror. The woman was standing at the edge of the dead zone, watching me leave. This time I could see her face clearly. She was beautiful, but wrong somehow, like a painting of a person instead of a real person. And she was smiling. I drove straight to town and spent the night in a motel, even though I lived only an hour away. I told myself I was just being careful, making sure my truck would start in the morning. But really, I didn't want to be alone in my cabin after what I'd seen. The next morning, I developed my pictures. Most of them came out blurry or completely black. But in one photo, the one I took of the center oak, there was something behind the tree. A pale shape that might have been a person, or might have been a woman in a long, dark dress. I went back to Raven Rock Hollow 3 days later with my research partner, Dr. Sarah Chen. Sarah was a forest pathologist. She studied tree diseases. If anyone could explain what killed those trees, it would be her. "Will, this is incredible," she said, kneeling by the dead oak in the center. She was taking samples of the bark, scraping pieces into small containers. "I've never seen cellular damage like this. It's like something sucked all the life out of these trees in a few hours." I was taking more soil samples around the edge of the dead zone. Any idea what could cause it? Maybe a chemical spill? Some kind of industrial accident? Sarah stood up and brushed dirt off her knees. "But there's no chemical plant for 50 miles. And look at this pattern. It's too organized to be accidental." She was right. In the daylight, the spiral pattern was even more obvious. The dead trees formed a perfect curve from the center outward, like a massive fingerprint pressed into the forest floor. "There's something else," I said, pointing to the symbols carved in the center oak. "These markings, they don't look modern." Sarah examined the carvings with her magnifying glass. "These are old, Will, really old. The bark has grown around them. I'd guess they're at least 50 years old, maybe more." That's when we heard the sound. It started as a low humming, like power lines in the distance. But there were no power lines in Raven Rock Hollow. The sound got louder, more like singing. A woman's voice, singing something sad and slow. We looked at each other. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. The singing was coming from deeper in the forest, past the dead trees. Sarah started walking toward it. "Sarah, wait." I grabbed her arm. "We should stick together." But she pulled away. "It's beautiful, Will. Can't you hear how beautiful it is?" I could hear it, and it was beautiful. That was the problem. The voice was too perfect, too sweet. It made me want to follow it, and that scared me. Sarah walked into the woods following the singing. I had no choice but to follow her. The trees got thicker as we moved away from the hollow. Old growth forest, the kind that had been here for centuries. But something was wrong with these trees, too. Their branches hung down lower than they should. The leaves rustled without any wind, and I kept seeing movement in the corner of my eye. Shapes that disappeared when I turned to look. "Sarah, we need to go back," I called. She didn't answer. She was 20 feet ahead of me now, walking faster. The singing was getting louder, more urgent. That's when I saw the woman again. She was standing behind a large pine tree, just like before. Long, dark dress, pale white skin, hair hanging over her face. But this time, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Sarah. "Sarah!" I yelled. "Stop!" Sarah turned around, but her eyes looked strange, dreamy, like she was sleepwalking. "The singing, Will, can't you hear it? She wants us to come closer." "Who wants us to come closer?" Sarah pointed behind me. I turned around. The woman was gone from behind the pine tree. Now she was standing right behind me, close enough to touch. I could smell her. Flowers and earth and something else, something rotten. Up close I could see that her skin wasn't just pale. It was gray, like old newspaper. Her dress was from another time, maybe 100 years ago or more. And her eyes were completely black. No white parts, no iris. Just solid black, like looking into deep water at night. "Hello, William," she said. Her voice was the singing we'd been following, but now it sounded different. Cold, hungry. "I've been waiting for you to come back." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. "Sarah, we need to leave. Now." But when I looked for Sarah, she wasn't there. The forest was empty, except for me and the woman in the dark dress. "Where is she?" I demanded. "What did you do with Sarah?" The woman smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "She's learning about my garden. Would you like to see?" She pointed toward a grove of trees I hadn't noticed before. They were moving, swaying back and forth, even though there was no wind. As I watched, I realized they weren't swaying. They were breathing. "Sarah!" I called. A voice answered from inside the grove, but it didn't sound right. It was Sarah's voice, but it echoed like she was calling from the bottom of a well. "Will? I can't move my feet. Something's holding my feet." I ran toward the grove, pushing past the woman. She let me go, still smiling. Sarah was standing in the middle of the breathing trees, but she was sinking. The ground around her feet was soft, like mud, but it was moving. Roots and vines were wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down. "The trees," she said, her voice dreamy and confused. "They're singing to me, Will. They want me to stay and listen." I grabbed her hands and pulled as hard as I could. The roots held tight, but I was stronger. With a wet, tearing sound, Sarah came free. We both fell backward. "Run," I told her. "Don't look back, just run." We crashed through the forest, branches scratching our faces and hands. Behind us, I could hear the woman laughing. Not a human laugh, something else, like wind through a broken window. We reached my truck and I gunned the engine. As we drove away, Sarah sat silently in the passenger seat, staring at her muddy boots. "What was that thing?" she finally asked. "I don't know." But I was lying. Deep down, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, I knew exactly what she was. The next morning, Sarah called in sick. She said she didn't remember much about what happened in the forest, just that she'd had bad dreams all night. Dreams about being buried alive under roots and dirt. I went to the local library and started researching the history of Raven Rock Hollow. What I found made my blood go cold. In 1692, 13 women had been accused of witchcraft in the area. They were tried and executed in the hollow where I'd found the dead trees. All 13 were burned alive on the same day. One of their names was Elizabeth Hartwell. According to the records, she'd been an herbalist who helped people with natural remedies. The townspeople said she could make plants grow in winter and cure any sickness with her potions. They also said she could kill with a touch. I found an old photograph of Elizabeth Hartwell from before her trial. Even in the faded brown picture, I recognized her face. She was the woman I'd seen in the forest. I should have left Raven Rock Hollow alone after that, filed a report about chemical contamination and let someone else deal with it. But I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, standing in that grove with roots wrapping around her ankles. And I couldn't stop thinking about Elizabeth Hartwell's black eyes. The dead zone was spreading. I went back every few days to measure it. Each time, more trees had died, always in the same spiral pattern, always the oldest and strongest trees first. The dead area was now almost twice as big as when I first found it. But worse than the dead trees were the living ones. Inside the spiral, some trees weren't dying. They were changing, growing in ways that made no sense. Oak trees sprouting thorns as long as my fingers. Pine trees growing fruit that looked beautiful but smelled like rotting meat. Maple trees with leaves that had turned completely black but hadn't fallen off. The Forest Service sent other people to investigate. They all filed reports that said nothing unusual was happening, just a rare fungal infection that would run its course. But I knew they weren't seeing the same things I saw. 2 weeks after my visit with Sarah, I got another call. A hiker had gone missing in the area around Raven Rock Hollow. His name was Mark Stevens, a college student who liked to camp alone in the wilderness. His tent was still set up, the search coordinator told me. All his gear was there, food untouched, like he just walked away in the middle of the night. I joined the search party, but I already knew where Mark had gone. We found him 3 days later in the grove where Sarah had almost been trapped. He was standing upright between 2 pine trees, perfectly still. At first, we thought he was alive. "Mark," the search coordinator called. "Mark, can you hear us?" Mark didn't respond. As we got closer, I saw why. His feet had grown into the ground, not sunk in, grown in. Roots had sprouted from his boots and dug deep into the earth. His skin was gray-green, like bark. His eyes were open, but they weren't human eyes anymore. They were solid black, like Elizabeth Hartwell's. When we touched him, his body crumbled like rotten wood. The search coordinator threw up. The other searchers backed away, talking about calling the police and the coroner. I knelt down and looked at what was left of Mark Stevens. Mixed in with the wood pieces and dirt, I found something that made my hands shake. It was Mark's journal. somehow preserved while his body had become part of the forest. The last entry was dated 3 days ago, the night he disappeared. The woman in the dress came to my tent. She said she wanted to show me her garden. I know I should say no, but her voice is so beautiful. She says the trees are lonely and need company. She says I could help them grow stronger. I can hear them calling to me now. The trees. They sound like they're singing my name. I think I'll go see what they want. I tore the page out of the journal and put it in my pocket. The search coordinator was on his radio calling for backup. But I knew the police wouldn't understand what they were dealing with. That night, alone in my cabin, I spread out all my research on the table: soil samples, photographs, historical records, and now Mark's journal. One pattern was clear. Elizabeth Hartwell was getting stronger. Every time someone entered her territory, she gained power. First the trees died, then they came back wrong. Then she started claiming people, turning them into part of her twisted forest. I had to find a way to stop her before she spread beyond Raven Rock H. Hollow. The next morning I drove to the nearest church. I hadn't been to Mass in 10 years, not since I'd lost my faith and left the seminary. But now I was desperate enough to try anything. Father Martinez was an old priest who'd been serving the mountain communities for 30 years. He listened to my story without interrupting, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "You think this woman is a witch?" he asked when I finished. "I think she's something that shouldn't exist, something that's been twisted by anger and pain." Father Martinez nodded slowly. The Cherokee who lived here before the settlers arrived had stories about spirits that lived in the old trees. They said some spirits were peaceful, but others, he shrugged, others had been hurt so badly that they couldn't find peace. "Can you help me?" "I can give you this." He handed me a small silver cross. "But faith isn't magic, William. It's not a weapon you use against evil. It's a light you carry in dark places." "What if I don't have enough faith?" "Then you'll have to find another way. Maybe the Cherokee were right. Maybe some spirits need more than prayer to find rest." I left the church feeling more confused than when I'd arrived. But that afternoon I got a call that changed everything. Sarah was in the hospital. She just collapsed at work, her colleague told me. Started having seizures. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. I drove to the hospital as fast as I could. Sarah was in intensive care, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her hands were cold as ice. "The doctors think it might be some kind of poisoning," her colleague said, "from that field work you two did together." But I knew it wasn't poisoning. I took Sarah's hand and felt the coldness spreading up my arm. Her fingernails had a greenish tint, like leaves beginning to turn. Elizabeth Hartwell was calling in her debt. Sarah had escaped from the grove, but she hadn't escaped completely. I stayed with Sarah all night, watching the monitors and praying to a God I wasn't sure believed in me anymore. Around 3 a.m, Sarah's eyes opened. "Will?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Sarah." I can hear her. The woman in the dress, she's singing to me. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. She says I belong to the forest now. She says I need to come home. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to get better." But even as I said it, I could see small green lines spreading under Sarah's skin, like veins but wrong. She was changing, becoming something else, just like the trees in Raven Rock Hollow. "Will," Sarah whispered, "you have to stop her, before she spreads to other places, before she turns the whole forest into her garden." "How? How do I stop something like that?" Sarah's eyes were starting to turn black around the edges. "Find out what she really wants. Find out why she can't rest." That's when I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to Raven Rock Hollow, back to the center of the spiral where it all started. But this time, I wouldn't run away. This time, I would face Elizabeth Hartwell directly. I went back to Raven Rock Hollow at sunset, when the light was golden and the shadows were long. I brought the silver cross Father Martinez had given me, but I also brought something else, all the historical records I'd found about Elizabeth Hartwell's trial and execution. The dead zone had grown again. Now it covered almost 2 acres, and the trees inside it had become even more twisted. Some had branches that moved like arms. Others had developed faces in their bark, mouths that seemed to whisper when the wind blew through them. But the center of the spiral was empty, except for the old oak tree with the carved symbols. I walked straight to it, my feet crunching on dead leaves that turned to dust under my boots. "Elizabeth," I called. "I know you're here. We need to talk." The air grew cold. The whispers from the tree faces got louder. Then she appeared, stepping out from behind the oak like she'd been waiting there all along. "You came back, William." Her voice was different now, not the beautiful singing that had lured Sarah into the forest. This voice was raw with pain and centuries of anger. "Most people only come once. I came back because I want to understand. I want to know what really happened to you." Elizabeth tilted her head, her black eyes studying me. "What really happened? I was murdered, William. Burned alive for the crime of helping people heal." She gestured to the dead trees around us. "Do you see my crime? I could make plants grow. I could cure sickness with herbs and roots. I could help barren women have children and ease the pain of the dying. For this, they called me a witch." "But you're not innocent anymore," I said carefully. "You've killed people. Mark Stevens, and you're trying to kill Sarah." Elizabeth's face twisted with rage. The nearest trees creaked and swayed, responding to her emotion. "Innocent? I was innocent 300 years ago when they tied me to a stake and set me on fire. When they made me watch 12 other women burn before my turn came. When they ignored my screams for mercy and called them the howls of demons." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the dead leaves around our feet. "Do you know what it's like to burn alive, William? Your skin cracks and peels. Your hair turns to fire. Your blood boils in your veins. And through it all, you're conscious. You feel everything until your heart finally stops." I forced myself to stay calm, even though everything in me wanted to run. "But that's not why you can't rest, is it? It's not just about the pain." Elizabeth went very still. "What do you mean?" I pulled out the historical documents I'd brought. "I read about your trial, Elizabeth. All of it, including the testimonies. Lies. All lies. Some of them, yes, but not all." I found the page I was looking for and read aloud. "Elizabeth Hartwell did willingly consort with the devil in South. Did use her powers to blight the crops of Goodman Fletcher, causing his family to near starve through the winter." Elizabeth's black eyes flashed. "Fletcher tried to force himself on me. When I refused him, he spread lies about me, cursing his fields. She did cause the milk of good woman Preston's cows to sour and turn to blood. Preston accused me of witchcraft first. I did nothing to her cows." I flipped to another page. "She did murder by poison the infant child of Thomas and Mary Carpenter after they refused to pay her fee for attending the birth." For the first time since I'd seen her, Elizabeth looked uncertain. "The child was born too early, sickly. I tried to save him, but you were angry when they blamed you for his death. You were angry when the whole town turned against you, and you used your real power, not the made-up witchcraft they accused you of, but your genuine gift with plants, to get revenge." Elizabeth's form began to flicker, like a candle in the wind. "They deserved it, all of them. They took everything from me and gave me nothing but hate in return. So when they burned you, you weren't just an innocent victim. You were guilty of some of what they accused you of. And that's why you can't move on, isn't it? It's not just the injustice of your death. It's the guilt of what you did when you were alive." The frost around our feet turned to ice. The tree faces began screaming. Not whispers now, but full-throated shrieks of rage and pain. "I was justified!" Elizabeth shrieked, her beautiful face contorting into something horrible. "They hurt me first. Maybe you were justified. Maybe they deserved what you did to them." I took a step closer. even though the cold was making my breath come out in clouds. But the people you're hurting now don't deserve it. Mark Stevens never hurt you. Sarah never hurt you. The trees you're killing never hurt you. Elizabeth's form was becoming less solid, more like smoke and shadows, but her voice was stronger than ever. The forest belongs to me now. I've made it mine with pain and blood. Everyone who enters it will serve me just like the trees. No, I said, the forest doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone. And the trees don't want to serve you. Look at them. I gestured to the twisted, screaming trees around us. This isn't growth, Elizabeth. This isn't life. This is a graveyard you've made from your own pain. For a moment, Elizabeth's face showed something other than anger. Confusion. Maybe even sadness. I don't know how to stop, she whispered. That's when I understood. Elizabeth Hartwell wasn't just a vengeful spirit. She was a soul in agony, trapped by her own guilt and pain, lashing out at everyone around her because she didn't know how to heal. I pulled out Father Martinez's silver cross and held it up. But instead of pointing it at Elizabeth like a weapon, I held it gently, like an offering. You can stop, Elizabeth. You can choose to let go. I've been angry for so long. It's all I know how to be. Then learn something else. Choose forgiveness, not for them, for yourself. Elizabeth looked at the cross in my hands. Slowly, the ice around our feet began to melt. The screaming from the tree faces faded to whispers, then to silence. Will you help me? She asked. And for the first time, she sounded human. Yes, I said. But you have to let Sarah go first, and no more people can be hurt. Elizabeth nodded. I felt something change in the forest around us, a loosening, like a held breath being released. What happens now? Elizabeth asked. Now you choose to rest. Elizabeth closed her black eyes. When she opened them again, they were brown, human eyes, filled with tears that looked like drops of morning dew. I'm ready, she said. The old oak tree behind her began to glow with soft, golden light. The twisted branches straightened. The carved symbols in the bark began to fade. Thank you, William, Elizabeth said, and turned, but her voice was beautiful again. Not the dangerous beauty that had lured Sarah into the forest, but the real beauty of a soul finding peace. She walked into the light, and both she and the tree disappeared. Sarah recovered completely. The doctors called it a miracle. Her mysterious illness disappeared overnight, leaving no trace. She doesn't remember much about what happened in the forest, and I never told her the whole truth. Some things are too heavy to share. The dead zone in Raven Rock Hollow began healing itself within days. New growth sprouted from the blackened stumps. Young trees took root where the twisted ones had been. Within a month, it looked like a normal part of the forest again. I submitted my final report, listing the cause as a rare fungal infection that had run its course. The Forest Service was satisfied with that explanation. They gave me a commendation for my thorough research. But I kept the real records, my photographs, my soil samples, Mark Stevens' journal. I locked them in a filing cabinet in my home office, along with the research about Elizabeth Hartwell and the other 12 women who died with her. I've been back to Raven Rock Hollow many times since then. It's peaceful now, filled with birdsong and the normal sounds of a healthy forest. Sometimes I sit by the spot where the old oak tree used to stand and think about forgiveness and guilt and the choices we make when we're in pain. I never saw Elizabeth Hartwell again, but sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist is rising from the hollow, I hear something that might be singing. Not the dangerous, luring song that trapped Sarah and Mark, but something gentle and sad and grateful. 3 months after everything ended, I got a call from another ranger in a different part of the forest. Strange things were happening in his sector, he said, trees dying in patterns that didn't make sense, and people reporting a woman in old-fashioned clothes walking among the pines. I told him I'd be right there, because that's what I do now. I'm still a park ranger, still a scientist with a doctorate in forestry. But I'm also something else, a guardian of the places where the natural world touches the supernatural world, a protector of forests and the spirits that live in them. My faith came back, but it's different now. Bigger. It includes not just the God I learned about in seminary, but the older spirits of tree and stone and water that the Cherokee knew about. The whole world is sacred, I've learned. Every part of it deserves respect and care. I still carry Father Martinez's silver cross, but I also carry tobacco offerings for forest spirits and a small bag of sage for cleansing ceremonies I learned from a Cherokee elder. I've learned to pray in several different ways because sometimes you need different kinds of prayer for different kinds of problems. The forest remembers every injustice. Some wounds in the earth never heal completely, but they can be tended. They can be helped to grow into something new. That's my job now, tending the wounded places where the past refuses to stay buried. And I'm good at it. If you ever find yourself in a forest where the trees grow in patterns they shouldn't, where the air smells like flowers and rot, where beautiful voices call to you from deeper in the woods, remember Elizabeth Hartwell's story. Remember that anger and pain can twist even the most beautiful things into something monstrous. But also remember that forgiveness is possible, even for spirits who've been lost in darkness for centuries. The forest is full of second chances if you know how to offer them. My name is William Ashford, and this is the truth about what happened in Raven Rock Hollow. I'm telling you this story because someday you might need to know it. The forest remembers everything. Make sure your memories are worth keeping. My name is Marcus Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 11 years. That's long enough to see almost everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, the occasional drunk tourist who thinks they can wrestle a raccoon. But what happened in October of 1987 taught me that some things in these hills are older and darker than anything they warn you about in ranger training. I'm half Cherokee on my mother's side. My grandfather, Samuel Ironwood, was a medicine man who taught me the old ways when I was young. Back then, I thought his stories were just that, stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. I got my degree in anthropology, joined the Park Service, and figured science would explain everything my grandfather's legends couldn't. I was wrong. The Blue Ridge Parkway cuts through what used to be Cherokee hunting grounds. These mountains have seen more than their share of sorrow. They were where the Trail of Tears began, where soldiers rounded up my people and marched them west to die. Grandfather always said the spirits here were restless, angry about what was done to them. Some places hold on to their pain, Marcus, he used to tell me, and sometimes that pain takes shape. I never really believed him until the October when the harvest moon hung fat and orange over Devil's Backbone Ridge, and people started reporting things that shouldn't exist. It started with a call from the visitor center. Tom Bradley, who'd been working the front desk longer than I'd been alive, sounded shaken. "Marcus, you need to get over here," he said. "Got some hikers came down from the North Trail, and they're saying, well, you just need to hear this yourself." I found them in the parking lot, a young couple from Virginia, both pale and jumpy. The woman kept looking over her shoulder at the tree line. "We were heading King the Overlook Trail," the man said. His name was Jeff something. "About 2 miles up, we started hearing footsteps behind us, but every time we turned around, nobody was there." "Could have been an echo," I suggested. "Sound carries funny in these mountains." "That's what we thought," the woman, Sarah, said. "But then we stopped to rest, and the footsteps kept going, right past us. We could hear them on the leaves, but there was nobody there." I'd heard stranger things. Hikers get spooked easy, especially when they're not used to how quiet these woods can be. "Anything else?" I asked. Jeff and Sarah looked at each other. She nodded at him. "There was a smell," Jeff said, "like something dead. Real strong, but it moved with the footsteps. And then what?" "We saw it," Sarah whispered. "Just for a second, through the trees. It looked like a person, but it was walking wrong. Too loose, like its bones weren't connected right." I took their information and told them what I always told spooked hikers. Probably just a bear, maybe a sick deer. The woods were full of perfectly normal things that could seem scary when you weren't expecting them. But as I watched them drive away, I remembered something my grandfather used to say: when the spirits are angry, they wear the shapes of the living to mock the dead. That evening, I called my partner, David Riverside. David was a wildlife biologist, smart as hell and twice as stubborn. If anyone could give me a rational explanation for whatever was happening up on the North Trail, it would be him. "Sounds like classic hiker hysteria," he said when I told him about Jeff and Sarah. "People come up here expecting to commune with nature, then get freaked out when nature actually shows up." "Yeah, probably," I agreed. But something about their story bothered me. The way Sarah's hands shook when she talked about the smell. "Tell you what," David said. "I'll hike up there tomorrow, take some pictures, maybe set up a trail cam. If there's something weird going on, we'll figure it out." After I hung up, I sat on my porch and looked up at the mountains. The moon was getting close to full, and its light made the ridgelines look like sleeping giants. Somewhere in the distance, I heard an owl calling, but it sounded wrong, like it was trying too hard to sound like an owl. I went inside and dug through my closet until I found the small leather pouch my grandfather had given me when I graduated college. It contained sage, tobacco, and a few other things I'd never really understood. He'd told me to carry it when I worked in the mountains, said it would keep bad spirits away. I'd never carried it before. That night, I put it in my jacket pocket. Looking back, I wish I'd listened to my grandfather's warnings sooner. Maybe then David would still be alive. The next morning started normal enough. David met me at the ranger station at 7, loaded down with his usual gear, cameras, sample bags, a notebook thick with field observations. He was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Ready to go ghost hunting?" he joked, shouldering his pack. We took the North Trail, the same one Jeff and Sarah had been on. For the first mile, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, the normal sounds of a forest waking up. David kept stopping to photograph animal tracks and examine scat samples. "See?" he said, crouching next to some deer prints. "Perfectly normal wildlife activity. Whatever spooked those hikers yesterday, it wasn't supernatural." But as we got deeper into the woods, the normal sounds started to fade. By the time we reached the 2-mile mark where Jeff and Sarah said they'd heard the footsteps, the forest had gone completely quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleepy morning, the dead, watchful quiet that comes right before something terrible happens. "That's weird," David muttered, looking around. "Where are all the birds?" Even the insects had gone silent. The only sound was our boots crunching on the fallen leaves and our own breathing. That's when we found the tracks. They started human enough, boot prints in the soft earth beside the trail. Size 11, maybe 12. But as we followed them, they began to change. The heel marks got deeper. The toe impressions stretched longer. By the time we'd followed them 50 yards, they didn't look like human feet anymore. "What kind of animal makes tracks like this?" I asked. David knelt beside one of the clearer prints, measuring it with a ruler. His face was pale. "Nothing I've ever seen," he said quietly. "The stride length is all wrong for a bear, and the pad structure, it's like something that's trying to walk on 2 legs but isn't built for it." We followed the tracks deeper into the woods. They led us off the main trail, down a steep slope toward an old creek bed. The smell hit us before we reached the bottom, that same dead, rotten stench Jeff and Sarah had described. At the creek, the tracks disappeared into the water. But on the opposite bank, we found something that made my blood run cold. Scattered in the mud were pieces of clothing, a torn hiking boot, shreds of blue fabric that looked like they'd been ripped rather than cut, and mixed in with them, clumps of dark hair. "Jesus," David whispered. I knelt next to the boot and saw something that made my grandfather's warnings echo in my head. Scratched into the leather were marks that looked almost like letters, but letters written by something that didn't quite understand how human writing worked. "We need to call this in," I said, standing up. But when I tried my radio, All I got was static. Same with David's cell phone. No signal, even though we should have been able to reach a tower from here. The equipment's probably just acting up, David said, but he didn't sound convinced. That's when we heard the footsteps. They came from upstream, slow and deliberate. But like Jeff and Sarah had said, they sounded wrong. Too loose, like whatever was making them wasn't quite sure how walking was supposed to work. "Hello?" David called out. "Park service. If someone's out there, we're here to help." The footsteps stopped. For maybe 30 seconds, the world held its breath. Then we heard a voice calling back to us. "Help," it said. "Please help me." It sounded like a woman, scared and hurt. But something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. "Where are you?" David shouted. "Here," the voice called. "I'm hurt. Please." The voice was coming from upstream, but as we listened, it seemed to move closer without the sound of footsteps. David started walking toward it, but I grabbed his arm. "Something's not right," I whispered. "Help!" the voice called again, and now it was definitely closer. But it still sounded exactly the same tone, the same words, like a recording being played over and over. David pulled free from my grip. "There could be someone really hurt out here, Marcus." As he walked toward the voice, I saw movement in the trees ahead of us. Something pale, about human height, but it moved wrong, too fluid, like it was flowing between the trunks instead of walking. "David, stop!" I hissed. But he was already 20 yards ahead, pushing through the underbrush toward where the voice kept calling, "Help, please help me," in that same terrified tone. Then the voice changed. "Marcus," it called. But now it sounded like David. "Marcus, you need to see this." I looked ahead and saw David standing perfectly still about 30 yards away, his back to me. "What is it?" I called. "Marcus," the David voice called back. "Come here. You need to see this." But the real David was still standing right in front of me, frozen in place. His face had gone white as paper. "That's not me," he whispered. The thing that looked like David turned around. From a distance, the face was perfect. David's brown hair, his wire-rimmed glasses, even his expression of concern, curiosity. But something about the way it moved was all wrong, like it was a puppet being controlled by someone who'd never seen a human before. "Marcus," it called in David's voice, "why aren't you coming?" I grabbed the real David's arm and started backing away. "Run," I whispered. We ran. Behind us, I heard the fake David calling my name, but the voice was getting deeper, rougher, less human with each repetition. By the time we reached the main trail, it had become something that definitely wasn't trying to sound human anymore. We didn't stop running until we reached the ranger station. David and I sat in my office for an hour, neither of us saying much. David kept cleaning his glasses over and over, and I kept checking the locks on the doors and windows. "There has to be a logical explanation," David finally said. "Some kind of, I don't know, acoustic phenomenon. Maybe someone playing a prank." I wanted to agree with him, but I kept thinking about those tracks, the way they'd changed from human to something else, and I kept hearing my grandfather's voice. "Some spirits wear the faces of the living to hunt the dead." "I need to make a call," I said. I drove to the nearest payphone and called my grandfather's old friend, Joseph Crow Feather. He was 93 and lived on the reservation about an hour south. If anyone would know what we were dealing with, it would be him. "Marcus?" His voice was thin but sharp. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You were?" "Bad dreams the last few nights. Dreams about the old hunting grounds. Something's stirring up there, isn't it?" I told him everything. The hiker's story, the tracks, what we'd seen in the woods. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Your grandfather told me this day might come," Joseph said finally. "The spirits on that ridge have been angry for a long time, but something's made them angry enough to ache shape." "What kind of shape?" "Skinwalker. A spirit so full of rage it can wear the appearance of the living. They're supposed to be creatures of the desert, the Navajo lands. But hatred, Travels, Marcus. And there's plenty of old hatred in those mountains. How do we stop it? Another long pause. You remember the old ways your grandfather taught you? I touched the medicine pouch in my pocket. Some of them. You'll need all of them. And Marcus, don't let it get close to you. Once a skinwalker touches you, it can wear your face too. That evening, David insisted on going back out. We have a responsibility, he said. If there's something dangerous in those woods, we need to document it, figure out how to protect people. I tried to talk him out of it, but David had always been stubborn. In the end, I agreed to let him set up trail cameras at the creek bed, but only if we went together and got out before dark. We made it to the site without incident. David set up 3 cameras in different locations while I kept watch. The forest was still unnaturally quiet, and that rotten smell hung in the air like fog. There, David said, finishing with the last camera. If anything comes through here, we'll get it on film. We were almost back to the main trail when we heard voices, 2 of them, a man and a woman, talking quietly. They sounded like hikers, maybe a couple out for an afternoon walk. But we'd checked the trail register that morning. No one else was supposed to be up here. Hello? I called out. Park Service? The voices stopped immediately. We're here to help if you need assistance, David added. For a moment there was nothing. Then the woman's voice called back. Oh, thank goodness! We're lost! The voice was coming from ahead of us on the trail. David started toward it, but I grabbed his shoulder. Wait, I whispered. Something's wrong. They sound like they need help, David said. But I was listening more carefully now. The woman's voice had sounded familiar. Too familiar. We're so lost, the woman called again, and my blood went cold. This was Sarah's voice, the hiker from yesterday. The exact same voice with the exact same terrified tone she'd used when telling us about her encounter. David, I whispered. That's not a real person. The man's voice called out next. We were hiking the overlooked trail about 2 miles up, and we started hearing footsteps behind us. Word for word, what Jeff had said in the parking lot. David's face went pale as he recognized the voices too. What is that thing? He whispered. Before I could answer, we saw them. 2 figures standing on the trail about 50 yards ahead of us. From a distance, they looked exactly like Jeff and Sarah. Same clothes, same hair, same worried expressions. But they were standing too still, like mannequins posed by someone who'd never seen real people before. We could hear them on the leaves, Sarah's voice said, but the mouth of the figure wasn't quite matching the words. But there was nobody there. But then we stopped to rest and the footsteps kept going, Jeff's voice added. They were replaying the entire conversation from yesterday, but their bodies weren't moving naturally. They swayed slightly, like they were underwater. Back away, I whispered to David, slowly. But as we started to retreat, both figures turned toward us with movements that were too quick, too sharp. Their faces were perfect copies of Jeff and Sarah, but their eyes were wrong, too bright, too hungry. Park Ranger, Sarah's voice said, but now it was coming from the Jeff thing. You need to hear this. There was a smell, Jeff's voice said from the Sarah thing, like something dead. They started walking toward us, but their movements were all wrong, too fluid, like they were gliding instead of walking. As they got closer, I could see that their clothes weren't quite right either. The colors were too bright, the fabric too clean, like a child's drawing of what hikers should look like. Run, I told David. This time, we both ran without argument. Behind us, I heard both voices calling out in perfect unison. We saw it! Just for a second. Through the trees. We reached the ranger station as the sun was setting. David went straight to his truck. I'm going home, he said, his hands shaking as he tried to get his keys in the lock. I'm going to drink a very large whiskey and pretend this never happened. David, wait. No, Marcus. Just no. Whatever's happening up there, it's beyond anything I can explain. And I don't want to explain it anymore. He drove off, leaving me alone in the parking lot. I should have gone with him. I should have insisted he stay at my place that night. But I was still thinking like a rational person, still believing that morning would make everything seem normal again. I was wrong about that too. The next morning, David didn't show up for work. When I called his house, there was no answer. By noon, I was worried enough to drive over and check on him. His truck was in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. I found David in his kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. He looked up when I came in and smiled. "Hey, Marcus, you're early." But something was wrong with his smile. It was too wide, and it didn't reach his eyes. "You didn't come to work," I said carefully. "Didn't I?" David looked confused. "I could have sworn... Well, I'm here now." "You're at your house, David. This is your kitchen." David looked around as if seeing the room for the first time. "Right," he said. "My kitchen, of course." That's when I noticed he wasn't blinking. At all. "David, are you feeling all right?" "Never better," he said, still with that too wide smile. "Ready to go back to the woods? I want to show you something I found." I backed toward the door. "What did you find?" "Tracks," David said, standing up. As he moved, I noticed his joints bent in ways they shouldn't. "Very interesting tracks. You should come see them." "Where exactly did you find these tracks?" David tilted his head, and it tilted too far, like an owl's. "In the place where the dead things walk," he said, and his voice was getting deeper, rougher. "In the place where the old spirits hunt." I ran for my truck and didn't stop driving until I reached Joseph Crow Feather's house on the reservation. Joseph took one look at my face and nodded grimly. "It has your partner," he said. "How can you tell?" "Your eyes. You've seen it wearing a human face." He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me exactly what happened." I told him about David's strange behavior, the way he moved wrong, the things he'd said. "The skinwalker is getting stronger," Joseph said. "First it could only mimic voices and appearances from a distance. Now it can take a full shape and hold it for longer periods." "Is David dead?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment. "The creature needs a source for its mimicry," he said finally. "It has to study its subject carefully to copy them perfectly. Your friend may still be alive, but..." "But what?" "But not for long. And when it's done with him, it will come for you." "Why me?" "Because you've seen it. You know what it is. That makes you dangerous to it." Joseph stood up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. "But it also makes you the only one who can stop it." From the chest, he pulled out items I recognized from my grandfather's ceremonies. Sage, sweetgrass, a small bag of cornmeal, and something I'd never seen before. Bullets that gleamed with an odd silver light. "Your grandfather made these," Joseph said, holding up the bullets. "He always said the old spirits might come back someday, and we'd need to be ready." "Will they work?" "Against the creature's false body, yes. But you have to be careful, Marcus. The skinwalker is most dangerous when it's cornered, and it will try to break your spirit before it kills you." Joseph spent the next hour teaching me the Pope, Roper prayers and ceremonies, the ones my grandfather had tried to teach me when I was young and didn't want to listen. Then he gave me an old rifle and the silver bullets. "Remember," he said as I prepared to leave, "the creature can wear any face, mimic any voice. Trust nothing but your instincts." It was dark when I drove back toward the mountains. I parked at the ranger station and loaded the rifle with Joseph's bullets. The weight of the gun felt strange in my hands, but the medicine pouch in my pocket felt warm against my chest. I didn't have to go looking for the skinwalker. It was waiting for me in my office. "Marcus," David's voice called as I approached the building. "Thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach you all day." The thing that looked like David was sitting behind my desk, but it had made mistakes. David's hair was the wrong shade of brown. His glasses sat crooked on his face, and when it smiled, there were too many teeth. "Where have you been?" I asked, keeping the rifle behind my back. "I've been investigating those tracks we found," the fake David said. "I think I know what we're dealing with now." "What's that?" "It's incredible, Marcus. There's a whole community of them living in the old caves up on Devil's Backbone. They've been there for generations, maybe centuries. The thing was talking faster now, more excited, but David had never gotten excited about anything except his research data. "That's interesting," I said. "What do they look like?" "Beautiful," the creature said, and its eyes were getting brighter. So beautiful. They offered to show me their true forms. And did they? Oh, yes. The fake David stood up, and its movements were flowing, predatory. "Would you like to see?" That's when it began to change. David's face started to melt, the features running like wax. His body stretched and twisted, joints bending in impossible directions. The skin started to peel away in strips, revealing something underneath that was pale and raw and hungry. The thing that emerged from David's stolen form was barely human. It was tall and thin, covered in patches of skin that didn't match, some pale, some dark, some that looked like they'd been torn from animals. Its face was a patchwork, too. Fragments of different people stitched together into something that hurt to look at. But the worst part was its eyes. They held all the intelligence and cunning of a human mind, but with a hunger that was ancient and endless. "Do you like what you see, grandson of Samuel?" it said, and its voice was a mixture of David's voice and Sarah's and Jeff's and others I didn't recognize. "This is what your people's pain has created. This is what rises from the bones of the dead." "You're not Cherokee," I said, raising the rifle. The creature laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "I am older than Cherokee. Older than any tribe. I am what happens when the earth itself cries out for vengeance." It started walking toward me, and with each step, its form shifted slightly, now wearing David's face, now Sarah's, now my grandfather's. "You cannot kill hate, Marcus Ironwood. You cannot shoot rage." But I remembered what Joseph had told me. The creature was most dangerous when cornered, because it would try to break my spirit first. "You're right," I said. "I can't kill hate, but I can send you back where you came from." I pulled out the sage Joseph had given me and set it alight. The smoke made the creature recoil, its stolen faces writhing in pain. "Iron and silver for the body," I said, raising the rifle. "Smoke and prayer for the spirit." The creature lunged at me, moving faster than anything human could move. But I was ready. The first silver bullet caught it in the chest, spinning it around. The second took it in the shoulder. Black blood sprayed across my office walls, and the creature screamed with voices I'd heard before. The missing hikers, David, others who'd been caught by this thing over the years. But it wasn't dead. It was changing again, trying to take a form I couldn't shoot. My grandfather's form. "Marcus," it said in his gentle voice. "Why are you hurting me? I taught you better than this." For a moment, my resolve wavered. This thing wearing my grandfather's face looked so real, so hurt and confused. Then I remembered something my grandfather had actually taught me. The spirits of the dead don't come back to ask for help, they come back to give it. I raised the rifle again. "My grandfather would never try to stop me from protecting people," I said. The creature's face twisted with rage, dropping the pretense of being my grandfather. "Then you'll die with them," it snarled and lunged again. But this time I was faster. The third silver bullet took it between the eyes, and the creature exploded in a cloud of black smoke and screaming voices. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but a pile of ash and torn skin that was already crumbling away. I found David 3 days later, in a cave up on Devil's Backbone Ridge. He was alive, but barely. The skinwalker had kept him just conscious enough to study his mannerisms and memories. When he saw me, he started crying. "I thought I was going to die up here," he whispered. "You almost did," I said. "But it's over now." David spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from dehydration and exposure. Officially, he'd gotten lost while hiking and fallen into a sinkhole. The story satisfied everyone who needed to be satisfied. I never told him about the thing that had worn his face. The federal agents showed up a week after David got out of the hospital. They wore dark suits and asked a lot of questions about unusual wildlife activity in the area. I told them I hadn't seen anything unusual. Your cooperation is appreciated, one of them said as they were leaving. Some things are better left unreported. I understood the message. But they couldn't stop me from talking to Joseph and the other elders on the reservation. We set up a network, people who would watch for signs of spiritual distu, or bants along the old Cherokee lands. Because the skinwalker I'd killed wasn't the only one. Joseph's dreams told him that much. The Trail of Tears was a river of pain, he said, and pain that deep doesn't just disappear. It pools in places, festers, grows into things that hunt. 6 months after the skinwalker incident, I transferred to a different section of the Park Service. I told my supervisors I needed a change of scenery. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't walk those trails anymore without feeling eyes watching me from the shadows. David left the Park Service entirely. He got a job teaching biology at a community college in Virginia, somewhere flat and safe where the trees don't hold secrets. We still talk sometimes. He never asks me about what really happened that October, and I never tell him about the dreams I still have. Dreams where something wearing his face knocks on my door in the middle of the night. I still carry my grandfather's medicine pouch when I work in the mountains, and I still have Joseph's silver bullets, just in case. Because late at night, when the moon is full and the mountains are quiet, I sometimes hear voices calling from the ridgelines. Familiar voices, speaking in languages that died with the people who knew them. The skinwalkers are still out there, waiting in the places where pain has pooled like stagnant water, wearing the faces of the dead to hunt the living. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder if the thing I killed was trying to tell me something important when it said, "I am what your people's pain has created." Because the more I think about it, the more I understand that some debts can never be fully paid. Some wounds cut so deep, they change the shape of the world itself. The Cherokee were driven from these mountains over a century ago, but their pain remains, transformed into something hungry and patient, and it's sinte, waiting for justice. If you ever find yourself hiking in the mountains of North Carolina and you hear footsteps following behind you, don't turn around. Just walk faster. And if someone calls your name in a voice you recognize, don't answer. Because some paths should remain closed and some masks should never be worn. My name is Eleanor Duskwood, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years. People always ask me about the name. Yeah, it sounds made up, but it's real. My dad used to joke that with a name like Bright Light in the Dark Forest, I was born to work in the woods. I wish you could see me now. Well, maybe not now. Not after what happened at Blackwater Falls. It was May of 1981 when everything went wrong. I was 31, working at Blackwater Falls State Park in West Virginia. The divorce papers were still warm in my glove box, and I was fighting like hell to keep my twin boys. My ex-husband kept telling the judge that a woman had no business being a ranger, especially not a single mother. So I had something to prove. I carried a .357 Magnum on my hip and knew how to use it. I had my EMT training, my wilderness first aid, my firearms instructor papers. In 9 years, I'd pulled 127 people out of bad situations in those mountains. Bears, broken bones, heart attacks, you name it. I thought I'd seen it all. The morning of May 15th started normal enough. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the trails to mud and making the falls roar louder than usual. I was doing my morning radio check when the call came in from dispatch. "Eleanor, we need you at Campsite 12, family of campers found dead." I grabbed my medical kit and drove the ATV as far as the muddy trail would let me. Then I hiked the last mile through dripping trees and slick rocks. The smell hit me first, that sweet, sick smell of blood and death. But something else too, something wild and musky that made my skin crawl. The campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. The tent was shredded into ribbons. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, and the bodies... Jesus. Even now, all these years later, I can still see them. The Hendricks family from Ohio, mom, dad, 3 kids. But they weren't just dead. They were arranged, lined up in a perfect row, arms folded across their chests like they were sleeping. Someone, or something, had positioned them that way after killing them. What the hell happened here? I whispered to myself. That's when I saw the footprints. In the soft mud around the campsite, clear as day, were tracks like nothing I'd ever seen. 20 inches long, maybe more. Shaped like human feet, but huge, with deep impressions from massive toes. The stride between prints was 12 feet. I measured it twice to be sure. I'd tracked black bears, mountain lions, even the occasional escaped bull. This wasn't any of those. This was something that walked on two legs and stood at least 12 feet tall. My radio crackled. "Eleanor, what's your status?" "I need the state police up here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the coroner. 5 bodies, multiple homicide." "Copy that. Backup is 20 minutes out." I secured the scene as best I could, taking photos and measurements. That's when I noticed the trees. 3 big pines at the edge of the campsite had deep gashes carved into their bark. Claw marks, starting about 15 feet off the ground and raking down. Whatever made those marks was tall enough to reach that high while standing. The state police arrived with Detective Morrison, a thin guy with tired eyes who'd seen too much. He took one look at the scene and shook his head. "Animal attack," he said. "Has to be. Maybe a rogue bear." I showed him the footprints, the claw marks, the way the bodies were arranged. He just shrugged. Bears can be smart. Sometimes they move things around. But I could see it in his eyes. He was scared, too. He just didn't want to admit what we were both thinking, that no bear did this. No bear was smart enough to arrange human bodies or tall enough to claw trees that high. As we worked the scene, our radio stations started acting up, static and interference every time we got near the footprints. My compass needle spun in circles. Morrison's digital camera kept shutting off by itself. "Equipment malfunction," he muttered. "Old mountains mess with electronics sometimes." Maybe. Or maybe something else was messing with our gear. Something that didn't want to be found. By evening, the area was sealed off as a crime scene. Morrison headed back to town with the bodies and his official report about a bear attack. I stayed behind to finish securing the campsite. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound that still haunts my dreams. It started low, like wind through trees, then rose to something between a howl and a scream. It came from deep in the forest, echoing off the mountains until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. Every animal in those woods went quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the bushes. Just that terrible sound rolling through the darkness. I unholstered my .357 and waited. But nothing came. After what felt like hours, the normal night sound slowly returned. Crickets, owls, the distant rumble of the falls. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck with the doors locked and the radio on, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. But deep down, I already knew the truth that Morrison didn't want to face. There was something in those mountains, something big and smart and deadly. And the Hendricks family had just been the beginning. 3 days later, another hiker went missing. James Mitchell, 28 years old from Pittsburgh, was supposed to check out of the lodge that morning. When he didn't show, they called us. I found his backpack on the Ellicala Trail, about 3 miles from where the Hendricks family died. The backpack was torn open like someone had grabbed it with massive claws. His gear was scattered across 50 yards of trail. But no blood this time. No body. Just those same impossible footprints in the mud, leading off the trail and up the steep mountainside. I was studying the tracks when Carl Bridgeton showed up. Carl was a 20-year veteran ranger, a mountain man with a gray beard and eyes like steel. If anyone knew these woods, it was him. "You're not going to like what I have to tell you," he said, kneeling next to the prints. "Try me." He was quiet for a long moment, just staring at those massive footprints. Then he looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Fear. My grandfather used to tell stories about something called the Yahoo. Said it lived deep in these mountains back when they were still wild. 10, maybe 12 feet tall, covered in black hair, strong enough to tear a man in half. "Carl, come on, you don't believe that stuff." I didn't. Until now. He pointed at the tracks. "Look at the depth. Whatever made these weighs at least 800 pounds. Look at the stride. It's not walking, Eleanor. It's running. Fast." A chill ran down my spine. Running toward what? Or away from what? Question is, which one is worse? We followed the trail up the mountainside. The prints led us through thick forest, over rocky terrain that should have been impossible for anything that big to navigate. But the tracks kept going, steady and purposeful. That's when we found James Mitchell. He was 30 feet up in an oak tree, wedged between two thick branches like he'd been placed there. His body was completely drained of blood, white as paper, but with no visible wounds. No cuts, no bites, no sign of how the blood had been removed. Jesus Christ, Carl whispered. How did it get him up there? I was wondering the same thing. The lowest branch was 15 feet off the ground. There were no ladder marks on the bark, no rope marks, nothing to explain how a human body had ended up that high. But as I studied the scene, I noticed something else. Scratches in the bark, like claw marks, going straight up the trunk. Whatever had killed Jam, this Mitchell had climbed that tree like it was walking upstairs. We need to call this in, I said. Carl grabbed my arm. Eleanor, listen to me. I've worked these mountains for 20 years. I know every animal, every sound, every normal thing that happens out here. This ain't normal. If you call the state police, they'll blame it on bears again. Maybe close the park for a few weeks. But that thing will still be out there. So, what are you saying? I'm saying we need to find it ourselves before it kills again. That night we set up a watch station near the Ellicala Trail. Carl brought night vision goggles and motion sensors. I had my .357 plus a backup pistol and enough ammunition to stop a charging rhino. We were wrong about the ammunition. Around midnight, the motion sensors started going crazy, beeping and flashing, picking up something big moving through the trees about 100 yards out. Carl adjusted his night vision and went perfectly still. Oh my God, he breathed. Eleanor, you need to see this. I took the goggles and looked where he was pointing. Through the green glow of night vision, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was standing between two pine trees, perfectly motionless, watching us. 11 feet tall, maybe more. Covered head to toe in thick, matted black hair. Its arms hung past its knees, ending in hands with long fingers and what looked like claws. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human. Almost. The features were too large, too stretched, like someone had taken a human face and made it bigger and meaner. Red eyes that reflected the starlight. A mouth full of teeth that were too sharp, too long. And it was studying us. Not just looking, studying. Like it was figuring out how best to kill us. Back away slow, Carl whispered. Don't make any sudden moves. We started backing toward the truck, keeping our eyes on the creature. It didn't move, just kept watching us with those terrible red eyes. Then my foot caught on a root and I stumbled. The thing moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. Oh, and second it was 100 yards away. The next it was 50 yards and closing fast. It didn't run like a human or an animal. It bounded, covering 20-foot distances with each leap. Run! Carl shouted. We ran. Behind us I could hear it crashing through the forest, snapping branches and sending rocks tumbling. It was gaining on us. Carl reached the truck first and yanked open the driver's door. I dove into the passenger seat just as something huge slammed into the back of the vehicle, lifting the rear wheels off the ground. Carl gunned the engine and we tore down the mountain road, tires squealing on the wet pavement. In the side mirror, I could see it standing in the road behind us, just watching us go. It let us leave, I said, breathing hard. What? It could have caught us. You saw how fast it moved. It let us go. Carl gripped the steering wheel tighter. Why would it do that? I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to understand that this thing, this Yahoo, was a lot smarter than we'd given it credit for. It wasn't just killing randomly. It had a plan, and we were part of it. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. Tom Brewster, the park's maintenance supervisor, hadn't shown up for work. His wife called around 7, frantic. Tom always called if he was going to be late, she said. Something was wrong. Carl and I found his truck at the maintenance shed, keys still in the ignition, driver's door hanging open. His toolbox was scattered across the parking lot like it had been thrown. And leading away from the truck, those familiar massive footprints in the gravel. "It's hunting during the day now," Carl said grimly. "That's not natural behavior for any predator." The tracks led us into the deepest part of the forest, where the trees grew so thick the sun barely reached the ground. We'd been following the trail for about an hour when Carl suddenly stopped and pointed up. Tom Brewster was 30 feet above us, suspended between two oak trees. His body hung limp, arms and legs dangling, completely drained of blood like James Mitchell had been. But this time, I could see how it had been done. The thing had woven branches and vines around Tom's body, creating a kind of web that held him in place. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, artistic almost, like the creature was making some kind of statement. "It's playing with us," I said. "No," Carl said quietly. "It's showing us what it can do. Look around, Eleanor. Really look." I looked, and my heart nearly stopped. We were standing in what looked like a natural clearing, but it wasn't natural at all. The trees formed a perfect circle around us, their branches woven together overhead like a roof, and hanging from those branches were things that made me sick to my stomach. Backpacks, hiking boots, pieces of clothing, a child's stuffed animal, all of it arranged in a pattern that was almost decorative. "How long has this been going on?" I whispered. Carl was examining something at the base of one of the trees, a pile of bones, picked clean and bleached white by time and weather. "These are old," he said. "Some of them are really old. Eleanor, I think this thing has been killing people in these mountains for decades, maybe longer." That's when we heard it laughing. Not a human laugh. Something deeper, more guttural, but definitely laughter. It was coming from somewhere above us, in the woven canopy of branches. The thing was up there, watching us, enjoying our fear. I drew my .357 and pointed it toward the sound. "Come down here," I shouted. "Face us." The laughter stopped. For a moment, the forest was dead silent. Then branches started moving above us, and something big began making its way down through the trees. It dropped to the ground 20 feet away from us with a heavy thud that shook the earth. In daylight, it was even more terrifying than it had been through night vision. 11 feet of muscle and rage, covered in black hair that hung in twisted clumps. Its face was a nightmare mix of human and beast. Intelligent eyes filled with malice, a mouth full of fangs that could tear through bone. But the worst part was its hands. They looked almost human, with opposable thumbs and long fingers. Fingers that ended in claws sharp enough to shred flesh and strong enough to climb trees like ladders. "My God," Carl breathed. "It's real." The Yahoo tilted its head, studying us like we were interesting insects. Then it spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that were almost like speech. A series of grunts and growls that seemed to have meaning, like it was trying to communicate. "It's intelligent," I said. "It knows we're here. It knows we've found its collection." The creature's eyes fixed on me, and I felt like I was being measured for a coffin. Then, moving faster than my eyes could follow, it reached out and grabbed Carl. Carl didn't even have time to scream. 1 second he was standing next to me, the next he was 20 feet in the air, held in the Yahoo's massive hands. It looked at him for a moment, tilted its head like it was curious, then twisted its arms in opposite directions. Carl came apart like a rag doll. The creature dropped the pieces and turned back to me. Blood covered its hands and chest. My partner's blood. My friend's blood. I emptied all 6 rounds from my .357 into its chest. The bullets hit. I saw the impacts, saw black blood start to flow from the wounds, but the thing barely staggered. It looked down at the holes in its chest, then back at me, and I swear to God it smiled. Then it spoke again, but this time the sounds were different. It took me a moment to realize what I was hearing. It was mimicking Carl's voice, the sounds he'd made when he died. The thing was replaying my partner's last moments like it was savoring them. I ran. I crashed through the forest like a madwoman, branches tearing at my face and clothes, Behind me, I could hear the Yahoo following, but not hurrying. It was toying with me, letting me think I had a chance. My radio crackled to life. "Eleanor? Eleanor, can you hear me? I'm hurt bad. Please help." It was Carl's voice. But Carl was dead. I'd seen him die. The thing was using his voice somehow, trying to trick me into stopping. "Eleanor, please. I'm bleeding. I need help." I kept running. The radio calls kept coming, getting more desperate each time. The thing was a perfect mimic, copying not just Carl's voice, but his speech patterns, his way of talking. If I hadn't seen him die, I would have believed it was really him. That's when I realized something that made my blood freeze. The creature hadn't just killed Carl. It had learned from him. It was using his knowledge, his memories, maybe even his thoughts, which meant it knew everything Carl had known about these mountains. Every trail, every hiding place, every way out. I was trapped. The Yahoo herded me like a sheep toward slaughter. Every time I tried to turn east toward the main road, I'd hear Carl's voice on the radio calling from that direction. When I headed north toward the lodge, the same thing happened. The creature was using my dead partner's voice to drive me exactly where it wanted me to go. West. Always west, toward the falls. I realized what it was doing when I broke through the tree line and saw the cliff ahead of me. Blackwater Falls dropped 300 feet into a churning pool of dark water. The sound of rushing water was so loud I could barely think. Behind me, branches snapped as the Yahoo crashed through the forest. I was trapped on a narrow ledge with nowhere to go but down. I turned to face it as it emerged from the trees. In the afternoon sunlight, it was even more impossible than before. 11 feet of nightmare, black hair matted with my partner's blood. Those red eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that was almost human. Almost, but not quite. There was something else there too. Something hungry and ancient and compliant. Deadly without mercy. "What do you want?" I shouted over the roar of the falls. It tilted its massive head and made those grunting sounds again. Not random noises. There was a pattern to them, like it was trying to tell me something. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed at me, then at itself, then at the collection of bones and belongings back in the forest. I understood. It was showing me my future. I was going to join its collection. My bones would be added to that pile under the trees, my gear hung up like trophies. But first, it wanted to play. The creature began moving toward me slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Each step shook the ground under my feet. I backed up until my heels were at the very edge of the cliff, rocks falling away into the churning water below. "Come on then," I said, pulling out my backup pistol. "Let's finish this." I fired all 8 rounds into its face and chest. The bullets tore through its thick hide, spraying black blood across the rocks. The Yahoo stumbled, roared in pain and rage, but kept coming. It reached for me with those terrible clawed hands. That's when I remembered the emergency flare in my belt. Carl had insisted we carry them in case we needed to signal for rescue. I pulled it out and struck it against the rocks. The flare burst into brilliant red light, hot enough to melt metal. The Yahoo's eyes went wide. Maybe it had never seen fire before, or maybe it understood what I was planning. I jammed the burning flare into the matted hair on its chest. The creature's hair caught fire like dry kindling. Flames raced across its body as it screamed, not the roar of an animal, but something almost human. It staggered backward, beating at the flames with its massive hands, but that only spread the fire faster. In seconds, it was completely engulfed. But even burning alive, it kept coming for me. We went over the set, lift together. The fall seemed to last forever. I could see the Yahoo beside me, still on fire, still trying to reach me even as we plummeted toward the dark water. Its red eyes were locked on mine right up until the moment we hit. The impact drove all the air from my lungs. Ice-cold water closed over my head, pulling me down into darkness. My heavy gear dragged me deeper. I was drowning, but I didn't care. At least the thing was dead too. Then something grabbed my ankle. Through the murky water, I could see it. The Yahoo, no longer on fire, its burned hide black and cracked, but still alive, still trying to kill me. It pulled me deeper, its claws digging into my leg. My lungs were screaming for air. Black spots danced in my vision. This was it. I was going to die in this dark water, killed by something that should have been dead already. But then my flailing hand caught hold of a tree branch, something that had fallen into the pool and gotten wedged between two rocks. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled as hard as I could. The Yahoo's grip slipped. I kicked free and swam toward the surface, my lungs burning, my vision going dark. I broke through into blessed air just as my strength gave out. The current carried me downstream and deposited me on a rocky shore. I lay there gasping, coughing up water, too weak to move. My emergency beacon was still working. It had been going off since I fell, sending out a signal that would bring rescue helicopters. I heard them coming as darkness closed in around me. But I managed to look back at the pool one more time, searching for any sign of the creature. The water was dark and still. Nothing moved beneath the surface. Whatever the Yahoo was, it hadn't survived the fall and the fire and 300 feet of crushing water. It was over. Or so I thought. They found me half dead on that rocky shore. Broken ribs, hypothermia, deep claw wounds that would leave scars for the rest of my life. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, reliving that terrible day over and over, the Officione. Al's story was simple. Rogue black bear. Carl and I had encountered it while investigating the earlier attacks. The bear had killed Carl and chased me to the falls, where we both went over the cliff. They found bear tracks near the scene. Big ones, unusual size, but still bear tracks. Nobody mentioned the 12-foot stride, or the arranged bodies, or the things hanging in the trees. Nobody talked about the way our electronics had malfunctioned, or the sounds we'd heard in the night. The Yahoo didn't exist in their reports. They never found Carl's body, or mine from where it should have been if the official story were true. They never found the creature's burned remains either, despite dragging the pool for days. But they found other things. Bones that were too old to matter. Gear from hikers who'd disappeared years earlier. Evidence of something that had been hunting in those mountains for longer than anyone wanted to admit. All of it was quietly filed away and forgotten. I tried to go back to work 6 months later. Made it exactly 1 day before the panic attacks started. Every shadow looked like the Yahoo. Every strange sound made me reach for my gun. I couldn't sleep in the dark or be alone in the woods. They transferred me to a city park in Ohio. Paved trails, well-lit areas, plenty of people around. Safe, but I still carry enough firepower to stop a charging bull. Old habits. The nightmares never went away. I still wake up sometimes, hearing Carl's voice on the radio, calling for help that will never come. I still see those red eyes watching me from the darkness. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear that terrible laughter echoing across the mountains. Because here's the thing, nobody wanted to face. We never found the body. They searched that pool for weeks. Brought in divers, used sonar, dragged the bottom with nets. Found everything else that had ever gone over those falls in the last 50 years. But no Yahoo, which means it's still out there. The attacks didn't stop after Blackwater Falls. They just moved. Virginia first, then Maryland, then Pennsylvania. Same pattern. Bodies drained of blood, arranged in ritualistic positions, massive footprints, claw marks on trees. Always in remote areas. Always explained away as bear attacks or mountain lion kills. But I know better. I know what's really hunting in those mountains. My boys are grown now, with families of their own. Sometimes they want to take their kids camping, show them the wilderness, teach them to appreciate nature. I tell them to stick to state parks with lots of people. Stay away from the deep woods, especially in West Virginia, because the mountains have their own guardians. Ancient things that don't welcome intruders. Things that remember when the world was wilder and humans knew enough to fear the dark. The Yahoo is still out there, somewhere in those endless forests, still hunting, still collecting, still arranging its victims like trophies. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. If it's working its way east, getting closer to civilization, closer to me. If it is, I'll be ready. I've got enough ammunition to level a building, enough firepower to stop anything that walks or crawls or climbs trees in the night. But deep down, I know the truth. Bullets didn't stop it before. Fire didn't kill it. 300 feet of crushing water didn't drown it. Some things are too old, too wild, too hungry to die. Some things live in the mountains forever. And they're always watching, always waiting, always hungry for more. My name is Daniel Nightfall, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. Before that, I was a Marine in Vietnam. I thought I'd seen the worst things a man could see. I was wrong. It was October 1986 when I first heard about the Devil's Tramping Ground. I was working at Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, doing what I always did, keeping people safe in the wilderness. The forest was my home now, a place where I could forget the nightmares from the war. The Devil's Tramping Ground wasn't on any official maps. It was just a spot locals talked about, a perfect circle about 40 feet wide where nothing grew, not a single blade of grass, not even weeds, just bare dirt in the middle of a healthy forest. People said the devil himself walked that circle every night planning evil things. I didn't believe in that stuff. After Vietnam, I figured the real devils were men with guns, not some made-up monster from old stories. But then the reports started coming in. "There's something weird going on out there," said Mrs. Henderson, an old woman who lived near the forest. She came to my ranger station on a cold Tuesday morning. Her hands shook as she held her coffee cup. "What kind of weird?" I asked, filling out my daily report. "My grandson Tommy went camping with his friends last weekend. They came back white as sheets, talking about seeing a tall figure dancing in that cursed circle at midnight." I looked up from my paperwork. Tommy Henderson was 17, a good kid who knew the forest well. He wasn't the type to make up stories. "Dancing?" I said. "That's what they said. A tall, dark figure moving around and around in that bare circle. They got scared and ran." I wrote down what she told me, but I wasn't worried. Probably just someone playing a prank, maybe college kids trying to scare people. Halloween was coming up after all. But over the next week, more reports came in. A hunter saw strange lights in the forest. A couple hiking the trail heard weird singing coming from deep in the woods. A local farmer found his cows all facing the same direction, toward the Devil's Tramping Ground, like they were afraid of something. I decided to check it out myself. On a Thursday afternoon, I packed my gear and headed into the forest. I brought my .45 pistol, a survival knife, night vision goggles from my Marine days, and camping supplies. If someone was causing trouble in my forest, I'd find them. The hike to the Devil's Tramping Ground took 2 hours. The path wound through thick pine trees and over rocky hills. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. The forest got quieter. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to die down. Then I saw it. The circle was exactly like people described. A perfect round patch of bare dirt surrounded by healthy trees. I walked around it looking for clues. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing to show how someone might get there to play pranks. I knelt down and touched the dirt. It felt cold, colder than it should be in October. I scooped up some soil to test later. Maybe there was a chemical spill or something that killed all the plants. As the sun started to set, I set up my camp about 100 yards away, hidden behind some big rocks. If someone came to the circle tonight, I'd be ready. The moon was almost full, giving plenty of light to see by. I put on my night vision goggles and settled in to wait. The forest was dead quiet now, not even an owl hooting. Then, right at midnight, something happened that made my blood run cold. A figure appeared in the circle. I didn't see it walk up or hear footsteps. 1 second, the circle was empty. The next second, something was standing right in the middle of it. Through my night vision, I could see it was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and shaped like a man, but wrong somehow. It started to move. The thing began dancing, if you could call it that. It moved in slow circles, raising its arms and spinning around. As it moved, the bare dirt started to glow with a dim red light. Not bright, just enough to make the circle look like it was on fire from underneath. My hands were shaking. In Vietnam, I'd been scared plenty of times. But this was different. This was fear of something I couldn't understand or fight. I watched for maybe 10 minutes. The figure kept dancing, never stopping, never slowing down. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The red glow faded, leaving just the empty circle in the moonlight. I stayed hidden until sunrise, but nothing else happened. When morning came, I walked over to the circle again. The dirt looked normal now, but it still felt cold under my boots. I went back to town and sent the soil sample to a lab in Raleigh. 3 days later, the results came back. According to the scientists, the dirt was completely dead. No bacteria, no minerals, no organic matter at all. They said they'd never seen anything like it. That weekend, I got another report. This time it was serious. A college student named Mark Stevens had been camping near the Devil's Tramping Ground with his girlfriend Sarah. They'd gone out Friday night and never came back. Mark's roommate called the police when they didn't show up for class on Monday. I joined the search team. We spent 2 days looking through the forest, following every trail and checking every campsite. On Wednesday, we found their tent about half a mile from the circle. Their gear was still there, but no sign of Mark and Sarah. Then, on Thursday morning, a hiker found Sarah. She was sitting by the side of a trail, staring at nothing. Her clothes were dirty and torn, but she wasn't hurt. The strange thing was, she couldn't remember anything from the past 4 days. The doctor said it looked like shock, but they couldn't find any reason for it. "Where's Mark?" I asked her at the hospital. Sarah just shook her head. "I don't know. I can't remember anything after we set up camp. It's all dark." We kept searching for Mark, but we never found him, not even his body. That night, I went back to the Devil's Tramping Ground. This time, I didn't hide. I set up my camp right next to the circle and waited. At midnight, the figure appeared again, but this time, it wasn't alone. There were shapes moving around the outside of the circle, dark forms that looked almost human but moved wrong, like their joints bent in directions they shouldn't. As I watched, one of them turned toward me. Even through my night vision goggles, I could see its eyes. They glowed like hot coals in a campfire. The thing that had been dancing in the center stopped and looked at me too. When it did, I heard a voice in my head, not spoken words, but thoughts that weren't mine. "Daniel Nightfall," the voice said, knowing my name somehow. "Vietnam veteran, 16 years of service, so much blood on your hands." I grabbed my pistol, but I couldn't move my arm. It felt like the air around me had turned thick as mud. "You killed 37 men in the war," the voice continued. "Do you remember their faces? I do. Would you like to see them again?" Suddenly, the forest around me changed. I wasn't in North Carolina anymore. I was back in the jungle, surrounded by the ghosts of everyone I'd killed. They reached out toward me with bloody hands, their mouths open like they were screaming, but no sound came out. Then, just as fast as it started, the vision ended. I was back in the forest, gasping for air. The circle was empty again, but I could still feel those coal red eyes watching me from somewhere in the dark. I packed up my camp and hiked out that same night. But I knew I'd have to come back. Whatever was in that circle, it knew who I was. And it wasn't done with me yet. Over the next week, things got worse. 2 more people went missing near the Devil's Tramping Ground. Both were found later, like Sarah had been, with no memory of what happened. But these victims were different. They had marks on them. Thin scratches that formed patterns on their arms and backs, like someone had been writing on their skin. I studied the marks, trying to figure out what they meant. They looked like symbols, maybe some kind of writing. When I showed them to a professor at the university, he got pale and told me they looked like old occult signs. "Where did you find these?" he asked. "I can't tell you that," I said. "But what do they mean?" "If these are real," he said, looking scared, "they're marks of claiming. Someone, or something, is marking people as its property." That night, I had the worst nightmare I'd had since the war. I dreamed I was back in Vietnam, But this time the enemy soldiers had glowing red eyes. They spoke in voices I recognized. The voice from the circle. "Come back to us, Daniel," they said. "Come back and face what you've done." I woke up screaming. The next day I decided to research the history of the Devil's Tramping Ground. I spent hours in the library reading old newspapers and local history books. What I found made my stomach turn. The circle had been there for over 200 years. Native Americans who lived in the area before white settlers came had stories about it. They called it the place where the evil one walks, and said no one should go near it when the moon was full. But the worst part was what I found in the old county records. For the past 2 centuries, people had been disappearing near that circle. Not just a few, dozens of them. Men, women, even children. Some were found later with no memory, like the recent victims. Others were never seen again. And every disappearance happened on nights when someone reported seeing the dancing figure. I realized I was dealing with something much older and more dangerous than I'd thought. This wasn't just some person playing pranks. This was something that had been hunting people for generations. That weekend, I went back to the circle, but this time, I brought help. My friend Jake Morrison, another Vietnam vet who worked as a security guard, came with me. I didn't tell him everything, just that someone was causing trouble in the forest, and I needed backup. We set up camp and waited. At midnight, the figure appeared as always. But this time, Jake could see it too. "What the hell is that thing?" he whispered. Before I could answer, the voice spoke in my head again. But now Jake was hearing it too. I could tell by the way his face went white. "2 veterans tonight," the voice said. "So much guilt, so much pain. I can take it all away." The dancing figure grew larger, changing shape as we watched. It sprouted wings like a huge bat, and I could see horns on its head. Its eyes burned brighter, and when it smiled, I saw teeth like broken glass. "I know what you did in the war, Jake Morrison," the voice said. "The village, the children. You still hear them screaming, don't you?" Jake started shaking. He'd never told me about whatever happened to him in Vietnam, but I could see the guilt on his face. "Make it stop," he whispered. The demon, because that's what it was, I knew now, laughed. "I can make it stop, all the nightmares, all the guilt. Just step into my circle, and I'll take the pain away." Jake started walking toward the circle. I grabbed his arm. "Don't listen to it." But Jake was stronger than me, and the demon's voice was getting louder in our heads. He pulled free and kept walking toward the glowing dirt. "Jake, stop!" He was almost to the edge of the circle when I did the only thing I could think of. I shot him in the leg. Jake fell down, screaming in pain and anger. "What did you do that for?" The sound of the gunshot seemed to break whatever spell the demon had on him. He looked around, confused, like he was waking up from a dream. The demon roared, not in our heads this time, but out loud. The sound was like 1,000 people screaming at once. The red light from the circle flared up bright as day, and I could feel heat coming off it like an oven. "You cannot stop me forever, Daniel Nightfall," the voice said. "I have been here for centuries, and I will be here for centuries more. Your friend will return, and so will you. And when you do, I will feast on your souls." The light faded, and the figure vanished. I helped Jake back to our truck and drove him to the hospital. He needed stitches, but he'd be okay. While the doctors worked on him, he grabbed my arm. "That thing," he said, "it knew. It knew what I did." "What happened over there, Jake?" He closed his eyes. "There was a village we thought was hiding enemy soldiers. The order came down to search it. But when we got there, it was just families, old people and kids. Someone panicked and started shooting. I didn't stop it. I should have stopped it, but I didn't." I understood. We all had things from the war we couldn't forget. Things that ate at us in the dark. "That thing feeds on guilt," I said. "It knows our worst memories and uses them against us. What do we do?" I didn't have an answer then. But I knew the demon was right about one thing. This wasn't over. It had marked me somehow, and it wouldn't let me go. I spent the next 3 days preparing. If I was going to face this thing again, I needed to understand what I was fighting. I visited every church in 3 counties talking to priests and ministers. Most of them thought I was crazy, but one old pastor took me seriously. His name was Father Mackenzie, and he'd been studying demons and evil spirits for 40 years. What you're describing sounds like what we call a harvester, he told me. It's a type of demon that feeds on human guilt and despair. The circle is its territory, a place where the wall between our world and hell is thin. How do I stop it? You can't destroy it, he said, but you can resist it. The demon's power comes from the shame and guilt people carry. If you can truly forgive yourself, accept God's forgiveness, then it has no hold over you. That's it? Just forgive myself? Father Mackenzie shook his head. It's not that simple. You have to mean it. You have to truly believe you deserve forgiveness, even for the worst things you've done. That's the hardest thing in the world for some people. I thought about the men I'd killed in Vietnam. For 20 years, I'd carried their faces with me, wondering if I could have done something different. Maybe the demon was right. Maybe I was a killer who deserved whatever was coming. But then, I thought about all the people the demon would hurt if I didn't try to stop it. Sarah, Jake, the missing college student Mark, and all the others who might come after them. On Saturday night, I went back to the Devil's Tramping Ground one last time. I didn't bring weapons or camping gear. I just walked to the circle and waited. At midnight, the demon appeared. But this time, it looked different. Bigger and more terrible than before. It had the body of a giant man, but the head of a goat, with twisted horns and burning eyes. Huge bat wings spread out from its back, and its hands ended in claws like kitchen knives. You came back, it said, speaking out loud now instead of just in my head. Its voice sounded like gravel and broken glass. I came back, I agreed. Good. Are you ready to make a deal? What kind of deal? The demon smiled, showing those broken glass teeth. I can bring them back, Daniel. All the men you killed in Vietnam. I can undo your sins, make it like they never happened. All you have to do is serve me. For a moment, I almost said yes. The idea of bringing back those 37 soldiers, of giving them their lives back, was everything I'd ever wanted. What would I have to do? I asked. Help me gather more souls. Bring me people full of guilt and shame, and I'll feed on their despair. In return, will erase your past. And if I say no? The demon's smile got wider. Then you'll live with those faces forever. You'll hear their screams every night until the day you die. And when you do die, you'll face them all in hell. I thought about Father Mackenzie's words. True forgiveness meant accepting that I deserved it, even for the worst things I'd done. I've got a counteroffer, I said. The demon looked surprised. Oh? I forgive myself. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but as soon as I said them, something changed. The red glow from the circle got dimmer. You can't forgive yourself, the demon snarled. Not for what you did. Yes, I can, I said, and this time I meant it. I was a scared kid in a war, trying to stay alive. I did things I regret, but I'm not the same person now. I've spent 20 years trying to make up for it by protecting people. That has to count for something. The circle was getting darker, and the demon was shrinking. You're lying to yourself, it screamed. No, I said. I'm finally telling myself the truth. I made mistakes, but I'm not evil. And I don't deserve to suffer forever for what I did when I was 19 years old. The demon let out a roar of rage and leaped at me. But when it tried to grab me, its claws passed right through me like I was made of smoke. This is impossible, it hissed. Guilt is your food, I said, and I'm not guilty anymore. The red light died completely, leaving us in ordinary moonlight. The demon was getting smaller and more transparent, like it was fading away. This isn't over, it said. I'll find others. I'll always find others. Maybe, I said, but not me. Not anymore. With a final scream, the demon vanished. I stayed at the circle until sunrise, but the demon didn't come back. When morning came, I saw something I hadn't expected. Tiny green shoots were growing up through the bare dirt. For the first time in over 200 years, plants were starting to grow in the devil's tramping ground. The missing people started recovering their memories over the next few weeks. Mark Stevens, the college student, was found wandering in the forest 3 days later, confused but alive. Sarah and the others remembered what happened to them now. They'd been trapped in the circle, forced to relive their worst memories over and over while the demon fed on their pain. But they were free now, just like I was. I filed my official report, calling the whole thing a case of mass hysteria caused by gas leaks from an underground cave system. The Forest Service bought it, and the Devil's Tramping Ground was officially closed to the public for environmental safety reasons. But I know the truth. The demon is gone from this place, but it's not dead. Creatures like that don't die. They just move on to find new hunting grounds. Somewhere out there, it's looking for another circle of bare ground, another place where the wall between worlds is thin. I kept working as a ranger for 10 more years before I retired. During that time, I heard stories from other parts of the country, places where people disappeared, where the ground stayed bare no matter what you planted, where folks reported seeing dark figures dancing in the moonlight. I started writing letters to park rangers and police in those areas, warning them about what to look for. Some of them wrote back, asking for more details. A few even believed me. I also started going to church regularly. Father Mackenzie had been right about forgiveness. It really was the key to breaking free from the demon's power. But it took me years to fully understand what that meant. These days, I live in a small cabin on the edge of Pisgah National Forest. I'm 76 now, and my hair is white, but I still hike the trails sometimes. The Devil's Tramping Ground has turned into a beautiful little meadow full of wildflowers in the spring. Sometimes, late at night, I get calls from people who've heard about what happened out here. Usually it's veterans like me, or police officers, or other folks who carry guilt from jobs where they had to make hard choices. They tell me about nightmares, about voices in their heads, about dark figures they've seen in places where nothing grows. I listen to their stories, and then I tell them what I learned. Some battles are fought in the soul, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, is the only weapon that works. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible. The demon was wrong about one thing. We don't have to carry our guilt forever. We can choose to put it down. But I still keep my old 45 in the drawer by my bed, just in case. Because even though I'm free from that particular demon, I know there are others out there, feeding on pain and shame in circles of bare earth all across the country. And sometimes, the phone rings in the middle of the night, and someone on the other end whispers, "I need help. There's something wrong with the ground behind my house. Nothing will grow there, and at midnight..." When that happens, I put on my boots and get ready for another fight, because some battles are worth fighting, even when you're old and tired. The devil may dance in many circles, but he doesn't have to dance alone. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to forgive yourself, you can make the music stop. My name is Joseph Moonhunter, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 14 years. People always ask about my last name. It comes from my Cherokee grandfather, who said our family was born to hunt under the moon. I used to think it was just a cool story. I don't think that anymore. I'm 38 now, and I've seen a lot in these mountains. Before this job, I worked with dogs in the military. That's why they gave me the predator control job here. When bears or mountain lions cause problems, I'm the guy they call. I know how to track animals, how they think, how they hunt. Or at least I thought I did. It was October 1989 when everything changed. The leaves were turning gold and red, and the park was full of campers enjoying the fall weather. My team of 6 German shepherds and I were patrolling near Cataract Falls, way back in the wilderness, where most people never go. The dogs were acting strange that morning. Rex, my lead dog, kept whining and looking at the tree line. His ears were flat against his head and his tail was tucked low. In all my years working with these dogs, I'd never seen Rex scared of anything. He once faced down a black bear without backing up an inch. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked him, scratching behind his ears. But he just whimpered and pressed closer to my leg. That's when I got the radio call. A family camping near the falls had found their neighbor's cattle dead. Not just dead, torn apart. The ranger on duty said it looked like something had drained all the blood right out of them. I loaded up my truck with the tranquilizer rifle and my .300 Winchester. Whatever killed those cattle was probably just a big cat that wandered down from Canada, but I always came prepared. The Smoky Mountains can surprise you. When I got to the scene, I understood why the other rangers had called me in. 3 full-grown cattle lay in a piwis, perfect line, each one killed the same way, a single bite to the throat. But here's the weird part. There was no blood anywhere. The ground around them was completely clean, like someone had come through with a mop. "Never seen anything like it," said Frank, the local sheriff. He was a good man, been working these mountains longer than me. Whatever did this knew exactly what it was doing. I knelt down next to the first cow and looked at the bite marks. They were too big for a mountain lion, too precise for a bear. The holes were perfectly spaced, like they came from fangs the size of railroad spikes. "Any tracks?" I asked. Frank pointed to the mud near a small creek. That's the strangest part. I followed him over and saw the footprints. They started as normal dog or wolf prints, 4 toes with claw marks. But halfway across the creek bed, they changed. The prints became longer, with what looked like heel marks, like something had started walking on 2 legs instead of 4. My dogs wouldn't even get close to the tracks. All 6 of them stayed huddled by the truck, making low, whining sounds. Rex was shaking so hard I could see his whole body trembling. "I'll set up cameras tonight," I told Frank. "Whatever this thing is, it'll come back. They always do." As we packed up to leave, I found something else. Scratched into the bark of a big oak tree were marks about 8 feet off the ground. 4 parallel lines like giant claw marks. But they were too high up. No bear could reach that high, and mountain lions don't scratch trees like that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's stories. He used to tell me about a beast that came to his town in North Carolina back in 1954. Called it the Beast of Bladenboro. Said it killed dogs and livestock, drained them of blood, and walked on 2 legs when the moon was full. Just stories, I told myself. Just old Cherokee legends. But as I lay in bed listening to the wind in the trees, I could swear I heard something howling in the distance. Not like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. This howl sounded almost human. The cameras I set up caught nothing but empty forest for 3 nights. On the 4th night, the memory cards were completely blank. Not corrupted. Blank, like someone had wiped them clean. I was checking the cameras when I got another call. This time it was Martha Henderson, who ran a small ranch on the edge of the park. Her voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand her. "Ranger Moonhunter, you need to get over here right now. Something killed my dogs, all of them." I grabbed my gear and drove out to her place. Martha met me at her front gate, and I could see she'd been crying. She'd raised hunting dogs for 20 years. They were like her children. "They were in the kennel," she said, walking me around back. "Steel cage, locked tight, but something got in anyway." The kennel looked like a tornado had hit it. The steel mesh was torn apart like tissue paper. 6 hunting dogs lay inside, all killed the same way as the cattle. Single bite to the throat, completely drained of blood. But the worst part was their faces. These were tough hunting dogs, the kind that would fight a bear if they had to. But they all died with their ears flat and their tails between their legs. They died scared. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked Martha. "That's just it," she said. "I heard my dogs barking around midnight, real upset-like. Then suddenly they all went quiet at the same time. Complete silence. That's when I knew something was wrong." I walked around the kennel looking for tracks. I found them in the soft dirt behind the building. Same pattern as before. Started as four-legged prints, then switched to two legs. But these prints were bigger, much bigger. "Martha, I need you to stay somewhere else for a few nights," I told her. "Go visit your sister in town." "You think it'll come back?" I looked at the destroyed kennel and the empty forest beyond. "Yeah, I think it will." That afternoon, I drove back to my cabin to check on my own dogs. They were all huddled together in the corner of their pen, whimpering. Rex looked up at me with eyes that seemed almost human, like he was trying to tell me something important. I was filling their water bowls when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Tom Bradley, a fellow ranger who worked the North Sector. "Joe, we got a problem," Tom said. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "I found Jake Morrison about an hour ago." My blood went cold. Jake was one of our best rangers, a guy who knew these woods better than anyone. "Found him where?" "Down by Laurel Creek. Same thing as the animals, Joe. Throat torn open, no blood anywhere." Tom took a deep breath. "But that's not the worst part. The tracks around his body, they weren't made by any animal." We drove out to Laurel Creek together. The scene was exactly what Tom had described. Jake lay face down in the leaves, his ranger uniform torn to pieces. The bite marks on his throat were identical to the ones on the cattle and dogs. But the footprints around his body told a story that made my skin crawl. They showed Jake running through the forest, stumbling and falling. Behind him, following his exact path, were those strange prints that changed from 4 legs to 2. "It hunted him," I said quietly, "like a wolf pack running down prey." Tom nodded. "There's something else. Look at his hands." Jake's fingernails were torn and bloody, like he'd been clawing at something. Or someone. Caught under his nails were tufts of dark fur, too coarse to be from any normal animal. As we waited for the sheriff to arrive, I noticed my dogs acting strange again. They kept looking up at the sky, even though it was still daylight. Their behavior reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. Then I remembered. Back in the military, we had a dog that acted just like this before enemy attacks, like he could sense danger coming from miles away. I looked up at the sky and realized what my dogs already knew. Tonight was the full moon. "Tom, I want you to head back to town," I said. "Don't patrol alone after dark." "What about you?" I looked down at Jake's body and thought about Martha's dogs. Whatever this thing was, it was getting bolder. Soon it would start coming after people in their homes. I'm going to find this thing before it kills again. But as the sun started to set behind the mountains, I began to wonder if I was the hunter or the prey. I spent that night in a tree stand overlooking the creek where Jake died, my .300 Winchester loaded with hollow point bullets. The full moon made the forest look like a black and white photograph. Everything was silent except for the sound of water running over rocks. Around 2 a.m., the silence became complete. Not even the creek seemed to make noise anymore. That's when I knew something was wrong. I saw it first as a shadow moving between the trees, tall as a man but moving on all fours like a wolf. Its eyes caught the moonlight and glowed yellow like headlights. When it stepped into the clearing by the creek, I got my first real look at the thing that had been killing livestock and people. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall when it rose up on its hind legs. Its body was covered in dark fur, but its shape was wrong for any animal. The arms were too long, the hands too large. And when it turned its head toward my tree, I saw a face that would give me nightmares for the rest of my life. It had the snout and ears of a wolf, but the eyes were human, intelligent, looking right at me like it knew exactly where I was hiding. I raised my rifle and took aim. The creature tilted its head like it was curious about what I was doing. Then it smiled. Actually smiled, showing teeth the size of butter knives. I pulled the trigger. The bullet hit its center mass, and the thing stumbled backward. For a second, I thought I'd killed it. Then it looked down at the bullet hole in its chest, looked back up at me, and started to laugh. A sound like grinding metal that echoed through the whole forest. The bullet hole closed itself. The fur grew back. In less than 10 seconds, there was no sign it had ever been shot. That's when I knew I was dealing with something that shouldn't exist. The creature dropped back down to all fours and disappeared into the forest faster than anything that size had a right to move. I stayed in that tree until sunrise, but it didn't come back. The next morning, I drove straight to the Cherokee Reservation to see my grandfather's brother, William Moonhunter. He was 92 years old and still sharp as a knife. If anyone knew about family legends, it would be him. "Uncle William, I need to know about the beast grandfather used to talk about. The one from Bladenboro." William looked at me for a long time before answering. "Your grandfather never told you the whole story, did he?" "What do you mean?" "Sit down, Joseph. This is going to be hard to hear." He told me about our great-great-grandfather, a Cherokee medicine man who tried to use wolf spirits to protect the tribe from white settlers. The ritual went wrong, and instead of calling on the spirits, he became infected by something ancient and evil, a curse that passed down through the bloodline. "Every few generations, one of our family is chosen," William explained. "The beast comes looking for us. It can smell our blood from miles away." "That's impossible," I said. But even as I spoke, I remembered how the creature had looked right at me in the tree, like it knew exactly who I was. "Your grandfather fought it in 1954. Nearly died, but he managed to wound it with this." William pulled out an old hunting knife. The blade was made of silver and covered in Cherokee symbols. "Silver, blessed by 7 medicine men. It's the only thing that can truly hurt one of these creatures." I took the knife, and the moment it touched my skin, I felt a strange tingling sensation, like the metal was alive. "There's something else you need to know," William said. "The curse affects us too. During the full moon, we become different, stronger, faster, more aggressive. But we can still choose to remain human." That explained the strange dreams I'd been having, the times I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there. That night, I didn't patrol. Instead, I locked myself in my cabin and chained the door shut from the inside. I could feel something changing in my body as the moon rose. My senses became sharper. I could hear mice moving in the walls, smelled deer passing by a mile away. But I stayed human. I stayed in control. Around midnight, I heard scratching at my door. Then a voice, rough and inhuman, but speaking perfect English. "Come out, Moonhunter. You can't hide from your family forever." I gripped the silver knife tighter and didn't answer. The scratching stopped, but I could feel the creature's presence outside all night. Waiting, watching. When morning came, I found massive claw marks all around my cabin. And written in the dirt by my front door were words that made my blood freeze. "Tomorrow night, the falls. Come alone, or I start killing families." I spent the next day preparing for what I knew would be either my death or the creature's. I loaded silver bullets into my rifle. Uncle William had given me 6 of them, blessed by Cherokee elders. I strapped the silver knife to my belt and said goodbye to my dogs. Rex seemed to understand what was happening. He pressed his head against my leg and whined softly, like he was trying to tell me to stay home. "I have to do this, boy," I told him. "If I don't, it'll never stop killing." As the sun set, I drove to Cataract Falls. The creature was already there, waiting for me in the clearing where this all began. In the moonlight, it looked even more massive than before. Its yellow eyes tracked my every movement as I climbed out of the truck. "You came," it said in that grinding voice. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want?" I asked, keeping the rifle ready. "What I've always wanted, to complete the family circle." The creature rose up on its hind legs, towering over me. "Your great-great-grandfather promised me his bloodline. I've been collecting on that promise ever since." "My grandfather stopped you." "Your grandfather wounded me. There's a difference." The creature flexed its claws. "But he passed the curse to you. I can smell it in your blood. You're already changing, aren't you? Getting stronger, faster, hungrier." I could feel what it meant. Since this started, I'd been eating more meat, sleeping less, getting angry at small things. The human part of me was slowly being pushed aside by something wilder. "I'm not like you," I said. "Not yet, but you will be." The creature started walking toward me. "You can join me willingly, or I can tear you apart and let the curse take what's left. Either way, the Moonhunter family serves its purpose." That's when I understood something important. This creature wasn't just a monster. It was my ancestor. The medicine man who had started all of this over a century ago. The curse hadn't made him into something new. It had trapped him as something in between human and wolf, hungry and immortal. "You're suffering," I said. The creature stopped walking. For just a moment, the animal mask slipped, and I saw something human and in pain looking back at me. "Every night for 135 years, it said quietly. "Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I raised the rifle, but instead of pointing it at the creature, I pointed it at my own head. "Then let me end this, for both of us." "What are you doing?" "The curse needs a Moonhunter to continue. No more Moonhunters, no more curse." I put my finger on the trigger. "I'm the last one. Let it end with me." The creature's eyes went wide. "You would sacrifice yourself? To save the people you'll kill tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after? That?" "Yes." For a long moment, we stared at each other across the clearing. Then the creature did something I didn't expect. It laughed, but this time the sound was sad instead of threatening. "You really are his great-great-grandson," it said. "He would have made the same choice." The creature began to change. Its massive form shrunk down, the fur disappeared, and suddenly an old Cherokee man stood in front of me. He looked tired, more tired than anyone I'd ever seen. "I've been waiting so long for someone strong enough to break this cycle," he said, "but I needed to be sure you would choose others over yourself." I lowered the rifle. "I don't understand. The curse can only be broken by a willing sacrifice, but not death. Acceptance." He held out his hand. "Take my burden, Joseph. Not to become a monster, but to become a guardian. Use the wolf's strength to protect instead of destroy." I looked at his outstretched hand, then at the silver knife on my belt. Uncle William had told me it was the only thing that could hurt the creature, but maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was meant for something else. I pulled out the knife and cut my palm, then reached out and took my ancestor's hand. The moment our blood mixed, I felt the curse pass from him to me. But instead of the wild hunger I expected, I felt balance. The wolf was there, but it was calm, controlled. My ancestor smiled and began to fade away like mist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Finally, I can rest." As he disappeared, I felt the change complete itself in my body. I was still human, but I was also something more. Something that could protect these mountains and the people in them from things that shouldn't exist. That was 36 years ago. I'm 74 now, and I still patrol these mountains. The other rangers think I'm just a tough old man who refuses to retire. They don't know that I've never aged a day since that night at the falls. The curse, it turns out, wasn't really a curse at all. It was a responsibility that my ancestor had twisted into something evil. In the right hands, it's a gift. I can sense supernatural threats from miles away. I'm strong enough to fight things that would tear apart normal people. And when the moon is full, I can take wolf form to track creatures through terrain no human could navigate. I've used these abilities to stop 7 other supernatural entities from taking root in the Smoky Mountains. Most people never know how close they came to danger. That's how I prefer it. My dogs lived longer than they should have, probably touched by the same magic that keeps me going. Rex stayed with me until he was 23 years old, and when he finally passed, he died peacefully in his sleep like he knew his job was done. I've trained 3 other rangers to recognize the signs of supernatural activity, though they don't know the whole truth about what I am. They just think I'm really good at reading animal behavior. The silver knife Uncle William gave me is now part of a larger collection of blessed weapons I keep locked in my cabin. You never know what you might need when something ancient and hungry wanders down from the deep mountains. Sometimes tourists ask me if there are really monsters in the Smoky Mountains. I always tell them the same thing. The only monsters in these woods are the ones we bring with us. But when they're gone, I make sure to patrol their campsites extra carefully, just in case. The mountains are peaceful now, but peace requires vigilance. Evil never sleeps for long, and when it wakes up, it always comes looking for the places people feel safe. That's why there's always a moon hunter in the Smoky Mountains. Not to become the monster, but to make sure the real monsters never get the chance. Some family legacies aren't moths, and to be forgotten. They're meant to be transformed into something better. And on nights when the moon is full and I'm running through the forest on four legs, tracking something that shouldn't exist, I can hear my ancestors' voice on the wind. Thank you. The curse is broken, but the guardian remains, and the mountains are safer for it.